Chapter 117. As the head of the village, Wang Dafu's house was really the best. It was the only two-story building built with blue stone in the village. The flat slate covered the path. If she didn't hear the sound of the river from time to time, Su Li would think that she was in the Qinghe town and didn't go out at all. "Woman, come out quickly. A distinguished guest is coming," Wang Dafu shouted with a red face. Immediately there came the sound of going downstairs upstairs. A middle-aged woman with heavy makeup and a plump figure came out of the building. When she saw Su Li, a hint of disappointment flashed in her eyes. She had long heard that a distinguished guest came to the village, but she didn't expect that it turned out to be a silly girl. It was really a waste of effort to dress up. Thinking of this, the middle-aged woman quickened her pace and came over. She said enthusiastically, "Please come in. No wonder I heard the magpies singing early in the morning. It turns out that this miss is coming." Su Li pursed her lips and didn't answer. Instead, she looked at Xiaowu beside her and said, "Since it's your home, you can make the decision. I'm a little tired. If you have any problem, you can find number 1 and others to solve it." Xiaowu looked around and was worried. When he heard Su Li's words, he suddenly became happy and deeply grateful. He bowed hard and said, "Thank you, lady." Madame Wang obviously didn't recognize Xiaowu and was confused. Finally, she only caught the words, "Su Li is tired." She immediately stepped aside and said attentively, "Since Miss is tired, why don't you go upstairs and have a rest? The guest room has been prepared." Su Li glanced at Fang Yuan and others and then walked into the building with Mammy Li. As soon as Su Li left, Madame Wang felt much less pressure and looked natural. When she was about to continue to make friends with Fang Yuan and others, Wang Dafu quietly pulled her sleeves behind her. She couldn't help but turn back angrily and whispered, "You have been pulling me since the door opened. The guest is here." Wang Dafu didn't have time to care about his wife's attitude. He hurriedly asked, "Where is my father? That old man?" Of course, he went back. Madame Wang rolled her eyes and did not see Wang Dafu's dramatic change of expression. She turned around and saw Xiaowu, who had walked to her with a serious face. She immediately praised him, "This child is really handsome. At first glance, I know he is well educated. My Zhuo can't compare with him." Xiaowu sneered and said, "Auntie said 3 years ago that I was a bastard who was born by a mother but raised by no father. How could you forget it so quickly?" Mrs. Wang's smile froze and she stared at Xiaowu blankly. Did she hear it wrong? This young man actually called her aunt, and it seemed like, he is Xiaowu. Wang Dafu covered his face and sighed. He had wanted to say it a long time ago, but his wife kept saying it, so he couldn't. "Little Wu." Madame Wang screamed, and the rouge on her face fell like lime. Then, she shifted her gaze to the side. "Is that Dadian?" Had the 2 little bastards she had chased out grown up? Returned to settle scores with her? Thinking of this, Madame Wang's face suddenly turned pale and she quibbled, "Xiaowu, Dadian. 3 years ago, you 2 wanted to leave on your own. Anyway, we raised you up. Is this how you repay kindness with ingratitude? It was my grandfather who raised me, not you." Xiaowu's eyes were very cold. He said, "Auntie, I don't want to care about the past. If you didn't force me that year, I wouldn't have met Lord Su. Now I come back just to see if my grandfather is well." Xiaowu looked around and said, "Which room is he in?" Madame Wang's face was very ugly and she didn't speak for a long time. Xiaowu saw Madame Wang's reaction and his expression suddenly changed slightly. He looked at Wang Dafu and said gloomily, "Uncle, you said Grandpa is fine. Is it false?" "Of course not." Wang Dafu quickly waved his hand. Looking at the group of young men and women with cold faces behind Xiaowu, he immediately said obediently, "But your grandfather doesn't live here." Before entering the Duang village, Fang Yuan and others had already taken the appearance-disguising elixir and took off their masks. For a group of ordinary people who didn't know Xiangong, the lowest level of appearance disguising elixir could cover up their appearance. The effect of this appearance disguising elixir could last for a long time. Doesn't live here? Xiao Wu heard the words and showed an unbelievable expression on his face. He said, "Uncle, you are my grandfather's only biological son. My grandfather is old and alone. If he doesn't live here, where else can he live?" Wang Dafu looked ashamed and couldn't say it. Xiao Wu's eyes were full of anger. He looked at Madame Wang and said, "Uncle, you drove me and Daddy away. Now even your biological father is driven away. Do you have any humanity?" "I didn't drive him away." Wang Dafu quickly waved his hand and looked at Madame Wang with a cowardly expression. Seeing that he was so useless, Madame Wang was so angry that her face turned pale. She pointed at her husband and scolded, "Wang Dafu, you are useless. If you do something wrong, you blame your wife. Can you blame me for your father's departure? It was obviously that old thing who disliked me and left on his own accord. It has nothing to do with me. Enough." Xiao Wu's roar shook the entire two-story building. Madame Wang was so scared that her body trembled. She immediately kept silent and didn't dare to say anything. "Wang Dafu, take me to see my grandfather." Xiao Wu looked gloomy and didn't even bother to call him uncle. Wang Dafu shrank his neck and said, "He lives in the old house." "If you still remember, I remember." Xiao Wu interrupted Wang Dafu's words and immediately turned around and bowed to Fang Yuan. He said, "Lords, I have something urgent to do." "Excuse me." With Fang Yuan's permission, Xiao Wu immediately ran out of the yard. Fang Yuan turned around and said to Fang Mu, "Go with him. Help him if you can." Fang Mu immediately nodded and went out to follow Xiao Wu. Suddenly, there were only Fang Yuan, Wang Dafu, and Wang Dafu in the yard. The atmosphere was extremely awkward. Yin Xuedong didn't look at Wang Dafu and Fang Yuan. She changed her voice and said, "It's still early. Why don't we go out together?" She didn't forget Su Li's entrustment before entering the Duang village. At this moment, she proposed it and immediately got the consent of Fang Yuan and Chu Qingning. They all left the yard in the blink of an eye. Madame Wang stood in the same place for a long time. Suddenly, she tore Wang Dafu's clothes like crazy and said, "It's all your fault. It's all your fault. Didn't you say that the two bastards died outside and wouldn't come back? How come they not only came back but also got lucky and hooked up with the rich and powerful? Why is it him? Not our son. Don't hit me." Wang Dafu's clothes were torn. He was in a mess and several wounds were scratched by Madame Wang's sharp and long nails. "The miss upstairs is still there. Don't hit me." Madame Wang's movement was stiff. She woke up and quickly pulled Wang Dafu's ear into the house. Su Li sat by the window upstairs and saw everything from beginning to end. But her expression never changed. "Miss, are we really going to live here?" Mammy Li stood behind Su Li and said angrily, "We said that we would pay. Isn't it convenient for Madame Wang? Let's talk about it later." "Mammy Li, don't worry." Su Li took the original sword book and lowered her head and said lightly. Mammy Li responded. She thought of all kinds of things that Su Li had experienced since she woke up last spring. She gradually calmed down and turned to do other things. Xiao Wu and Datian came to the old house according to their memory. Looking at the thatched hut that was about to collapse, their eyes turned red instantly and they rushed in at the same time. Fang Mu looked at the half-tilted thatched hut and sighed. He bent down and walked in. Under the effect of Su Li's elixir, he was much taller than before. Although it was daytime, the thatched hut's window was small and the light was very dim. Xiao Wu bent down and passed through a straw door. He immediately saw the weak old man lying on the bed. It was the old village head that he missed for a long time. "Grandpa." Xiao Wu knelt in front of the straw couch and burst into tears. He said, Grandpa, I am back. I am Xiaowu. Dadian and I have come back to see you. The old man lying on the bed opened his eyes in a daze, revealing a pair of turbid eyes. When he heard the voice, a pair of old hands as rough as bark immediately stretched out. After grabbing Xiaowu's hand, he immediately smiled and showed his few teeth. It's Xiaowu. It's good that you are back. It's good that you are back. Xiaowu grasped the old man's hand tightly. He looked at the clothes that his grandfather wore like a beggar. He didn't know how long he hadn't taken a bath. His whole body exuded an unpleasant smell. He was so weak that he couldn't speak loudly. It was obvious that he was too hungry and had no strength. Xiaowu's eyes emitted a cold light. 3 years ago, he was a healthy old man who was hale and hearty and dressed neatly. It was absolutely abnormal that he became like this today. Fangmu glanced at Xiaowu and his 2 grandsons at the door and did not go in. He turned and walked into another room of the thatched hut. It should be the kitchen according to the geographical location. There was a pot in the kitchen, which had been used recently. Fangmu opened it and saw the turbid soup floating in it. He immediately took the spoon and scooped it up to have a look. It was all wild vegetables. He doesn't even have food to eat. No wonder the old man is so weak. Fangmu murmured. Although he was not a doctor, he had experienced the old man's weak state. He could see it at a glance. After thinking for a moment, he untied the water skin from his waist and took out an elixir. He turned and walked into the room. Grandpa, tell me, did that woman, Huli, do you think she did it? I'm going to find her now. As soon as he entered the room, Fangmu heard Xiaowu's words full of killing intent. No. Don't. Don't make trouble. The old man gasped and said intermittently. He was afraid that Xiaowu would do stupid things. He used all his strength to hold Xiaowu's hand and didn't let him go. But he was so anxious that he rolled his eyes and fainted completely. Grandpa, what's wrong with you? Xiaowu panicked immediately. He kept shaking his grandpa's body with tears flowing. Grandpa, don't scare me. Fangmu couldn't stand it anymore. He pulled Xiaowu away and shouted in a deep voice, if you don't want to see your grandpa starve to death, get out of my way. Xiaowu stood up without saying anything and knelt down in front of Fangmu. He said, Your Honor, please save my grandpa's life. I'm willing to do anything. Fangmu sat on the bedside and fed the old man the elixir. He tapped several acupoints on the old man's chest with his fingers to help open them. He said, Don't worry. Your grandpa is fine. He just fainted because of hunger. I fed him a pill with a mild medicinal effect. It's enough to help him recover from his weakened state. If you have the time to kneel, why don't you go get some food from the carriage? This pill alone isn't enough to make him full. Xiaowu heard Fangmu's words and immediately smiled. He wiped his tears and said, Thank you, Your Honor. I'm going now. Dadian knelt on the ground and kowtowed a few times. He didn't know how to express his gratitude. He could only tell Fangmu with actions. Chapter 118. 10 minutes later, there was a smell of meat coming from the thatched cottage. The old village head held the steamed bun in his right hand and the broth in his left hand. While wolfing down the steamed bun, he raised his head and repeatedly confirmed with Xiaowu, Xiaowu, are you sure you didn't steal them? Xiaowu scratched his head and looked embarrassed. It seemed that there was nothing wrong with stealing. The bodyguard was not Lord Su Li's servant. He asked him to get the food. Xiaowu was so anxious that he didn't react and went to get it directly. The old village head stopped eating, put down the steamed bun, and said with a sullen face, Really? How did I teach you? How can you steal? Xiaowu lowered his head shamefully. Fangmu immediately smiled and said, Old village head, don't blame Xiaowu. I asked him to get it. I think Lord Su Li won't care about such a small thing. Lord Su Li. The old village head was confused. Then Xiaowu talked about his experience in the past 3 years and his current situation. The old village head burst into tears immediately. He touched the heads of Xiaowu and Datian with relief and sighed, "God bless you two to meet such a good person as Lord Su Li. By the way, I can recover so quickly thanks to the elixir of this little brother. Unfortunately, I have no money and I'm afraid that I can't afford it. Your unyielding character is admirable. Although the elixir is good, it is not as good as your life." Feng Mu looked sincere and smiled gently. "Besides, the elixir was given to me by my master. Naturally, I can control it. Even if my master knows it, she won't say anything. Don't worry, old mister. Little brother, you are really kind-hearted." Seeing Feng Mu and his grandfather talking happily, Xiaowu temporarily suppressed the anger in his heart. He thought that the bodyguard looked cold and hard to get along with, but in fact, he was surprisingly kind-hearted. It was really amazing. "Grandpa, it's almost dark. Go back with me," Xiaowu said and was about to help the old village head up. The old village head was defeated and waved his hand repeatedly. "You go back. I won't go there, so as not to make trouble for Dafu." "Grandpa, what are you saying?" Xiaowu frowned and said hurriedly, "Grandpa, you did nothing wrong. Why are you starving and suffering here? It is clear that Wang Li wants to drive you away. I won't let her get what she wants. Besides, don't you want to visit Lady Su Li? She is the benefactor of me and Datian. Maybe she will uphold justice for you." The old village head failed to persuade Xiaowu. Finally, he followed Xiaowu back to the small building. "Ayo, what's that smell? It's sour and stinky. I can smell it from afar." Wang Li covered her nose and ran out of the yard. When she saw Xiaowu and the other 3 people coming back, her face immediately became longer than a horse's face. Her sharp voice pierced the eardrum. "Little Wu. Why did you carry him back? It's so smelly. Hurry up and get out, don't dirty the courtyard." Xiaowu was angry and was about to step forward. But Feng Mu stood up first and said, "Madam Wang, it is my idea that the old village head comes back. It is also my master's idea. Do you have any objection?" Wang Li looked stagnant and said intermittently, "Even, your miss can't meddle in other people's family affairs, can she?" As she said, Wang Li had stepped aside and stopped blocking the door with her body. Xiaowu snorted and walked into the yard with the old village head on his back. Then he and Datian immediately started to wash the old village head and change his clothes. Feng Mu glanced at Wang Li, who stood aside with resentment. Then he went up to the second floor nervously. Before he reported, he heard a melodious voice like that of an oriole coming from the room. "Come in." Feng Mu's scalp was numb. He hesitated for a moment and opened the door obediently. When he saw Su Li sitting in a chair and reading a book with her back to him, he immediately walked a few steps lightly and stood behind Su Li. It was the first time for him to face Su Li alone. It was impossible to say that he was not nervous. Although they were of the same age, Su Li's image in his heart was heavier than that of his eldest brother, Fang Yuan. Su Li was like a god overlooking all living beings in the sky and couldn't be blasphemed. "You are quite self-assertive." Su Li turned around and smiled lightly. "I never said that I let the old village head come here." Feng Mu smiled embarrassedly and didn't know what to say. He was indeed a little self-assertive. "Besides, the elixir I gave you was used to consolidate your foundation and restore your cultivation. But you gave it to him." Su Li's next words made Feng Mu's smile stiffen. He stuttered and explained, "I also saw that the old man was so weak that he was about to die, so I..." "Forget it. It seems that you don't understand the value of that elixir." Su Li lowered her head again and looked at the scroll in her hand. "For the sake of him being Xiaowu's grandfather, I won't argue with you. But the cost of refining the elixir will be borne by you. I will deduct it from your salary." Feng Mu gave a hollow laugh and said, "Can I ask how much is the elixir worth?" It is your salary for 3 years. You can leave now. Su Li said lightly. Fang Mu looked aggrieved and almost cried out. But after thinking about it, he found that he ate, drank and lived in the Linli building. Even if he had no salary, it didn't affect him. But if he wanted to go out in the future, he had to ask his eldest brother for help. Mammy Li sent Fang Mu away. Looking at his listless appearance, she couldn't help but snigger. The miss really likes to tease these boys. I don't know which one is the type that the miss likes. Speaking of which, the miss is 16 years old. It's time to talk about marriage. Time flies. Speaking of which, the old miss has been gone for 16 years. Mammy Li stood by the door and looked at Su Li, who was reading quietly in the room. She sighed in her heart, if the little miss is still alive, she will be as old as Arya. In the bathroom, Xiaowu and Datian boiled 3 buckets of bath water for the old village head. They almost removed 3 layers of the old village head's dirty skin. The firewood piled in the room was reduced by half. Wang Li couldn't help but curse. Old bastard, you waste so much firewood as soon as you come back. When the miss leaves, I won't let you off. Xiaowu didn't have time to pay attention to Wang Li. He happily helped his grandfather change into the clothes he brought from the Qinghe town and combed his grandfather's disheveled white hair. The old village head immediately seemed to be a different person from inside to outside. He became the old man of virtue and prestige 3 years ago instead of an old beggar in rags. Looking at his clothes, the old village head couldn't hide his joy and said, Xiaowu, it's not impolite for me to see Ms. Su in this clothes, right? No, it's not. Xiaowu smiled brightly and said, Ms. Su is very nice. It doesn't matter if you wear coarse clothes, as long as you are clean. How can I do that? The old village head pulled a long face and looked at himself in the mirror. Anyway, Mr. Su is the benefactor of both of you. I have to be serious. Datian, come and help me to comb my beard. How can I see others with such a mess? When the 3 of them were busy, a short and fat figure came to the door. It was Wang Dafu. Seeing that his father regained his spirit, Wang Dafu suddenly had extremely complicated emotions. All kinds of words piled up in his heart were stuck in his throat and finally turned into one word, Dad. When the old village head turned his head and saw Wang Dafu, his face immediately became gloomy. After a few seconds, he snorted and said, Don't worry. Even if you give me this place, I won't live here. This time I just come to see Xiaowu's benefactor. I won't disturb you. Hearing that, Wang Dafu immediately breathed a sigh of relief. He nodded and said nothing. Then he turned around and left the room. Xiaowu was so angry that his lungs were about to explode. He shouted, You don't even care about your father's life. Wang Dafu, are you still a human? The old village head hurriedly pulled Xiaowu and sighed deeply. His wrinkled face looked tired and said, Forget it. I'm also tired. I can't scold you anymore. Xiaowu, don't make trouble for Ms. Su. Just let it go. He would rather suffer losses than any misfortune in his son's family. This was also retribution. If he didn't have a bad vision and let his son marry Wang Li, he wouldn't end up like this today. Looking at the old village head, Xiaowu's heart ached. Finally, he could only listen to the old village head and no longer make trouble for Wang Dafu. Ta, 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 accompanied by Xiaowu, the old village head went upstairs. Mammy Li pushed the door open. When the old man, who was in his 60s, saw the young girl in the room, he was suddenly stunned. He looked around and blurted out, Where is Miss Su? Why is she not upstairs? Xiaowu hurriedly whispered, Grandpa, she is Miss Su, the youngest special class lecturer of the Qinghe girls' school. The old village head was completely stunned. Su Li was just a young girl. How could she become the special class lecturer of the Qinghe girls' school? Grandpa, Xiaowu shouted twice, and the old village head immediately came to his senses. He tidied up his clothes and walked in. When he was about to kneel down, Su Li stepped forward and held him. Her gentle voice like spring breeze flowed into the old village head's heart like a stream. You are an elder, so I should be the one bowing to you. I can't accept kneeling to you. Su Li's laughter immediately made the old village head relax. He shook his head and said, in ancient times, the accomplished are the teachers. Ms. Su can become the special class lecturer of the school. You must have real ability and learning. I am just a Shiozai who failed the imperial examination. How can I be compared with Ms. Su? It is not inappropriate to worship her. Old village head, you are really a talkative person. Su Li personally poured tea and let the old village head sit down. She said, may I know your name? The old village head was flattered and took the tea. He hurriedly said, I am Wang Wangnyo. My ancestors have been in Dawang village for generations. When I was young, I went to the nearby town to take the local examination and became the village head. I am not as knowledgeable as Xiaowu. I am really ashamed, old village head, you are really modest. In fact, besides coming here to relax, I have another request. I hope you can help me. Su Li said and signaled Mammy Li with her eyes. Mammy Li immediately took Xiaowu and Datian away. Seeing Su Li being so cautious, the old village head couldn't help but feel nervous. He originally thought it was strange that a special class lecturer of the Qinghe girls' school would come to such a poor and backward village. It turned out that she really had other purposes. After contemplating, the old village head looked serious and said slowly, Miss Su, you can say it directly. Xiaowu and Datian owe you a lot. As long as I can help, I will do my best to help you. Su Li still smiled gently and said, Old village head, don't be nervous. It is not a big deal. You have lived here for decades. You must be very familiar with the terrain. Do you know some beautiful and unfrequented places? I want to build a yard to enjoy the beautiful scenery. After all, I can't live in other people's homes every time I come here. I see. The old village head suddenly understood and immediately said with a smile, I have no other skills. But in terms of familiarity with the terrain of the nearby mountains and rivers, no one can compare with me within 100 miles. When I was young, I worked as a laborer in the medicine hall and went into the mountains to collect herbs every day. If you want to find a place, I will take you to see it tomorrow. Su Li smiled slightly and shook her head, it is not urgent. I have ordered others to buy the map of the nearby mountains and rivers. At that time, you only need to mark the suitable place, and someone will go to explore it. It will save a lot of time. That's good. The old village head looked ashamed and said, I can't stand the tossing and turning. Miss Su, you are so thoughtful. I also want to save time. Don't be ashamed, old village head. Su Li comforted him and drank tea quietly without talking. The old village head also imitated her and took a sip of tea, but he felt strange in his heart. Chapter 119. Bang! Suddenly, there was a loud bang in the small courtyard. It seemed that the courtyard door was kicked open. Although the old village head had lived for a long time and had good self-restraint, this was his son's home. When he heard the sound, he couldn't sit still immediately. If you are curious, you can go downstairs and have a look. I am used to staying alone. You don't need to wait for the map here. After Su Li reminded him, the old village head excused himself and hurried downstairs. When he went downstairs, the old village head saw the culprit who kicked open the courtyard door. He was slightly stunned. Standing at the door was a little boy who seemed to be about 10 years old. His clothes were tattered. He didn't know where he came back from fighting. The boy sniffed with his nose. Suddenly, he pulled a long face and howled, Mom, the house is so stinky. Is it done by Dad? Wang Li heard the sound and came out. When she saw the boy, she immediately exclaimed, Oh, my baby son, Zhua. What happened to you? Your clothes are torn. Let me see if you are hurt. The boy's face shrank. He immediately swung his sleeves and hit Wang Li's face. The latter screamed in pain, "I'm fine. Let Dad out. He made the house so stinky. I'm going to get even with him." When the old village head saw his grandson, whom he hadn't seen for 3 years, became so sloppy, he trembled with anger. He couldn't help but step forward and slap the boy. Slap! Wang Li was instantly stunned. She looked at the old man who was bullied casually like an angry lion. She couldn't say a word for a while. "I don't care what I do. But look at what you taught Zhua. How can you face the ancestors of the Wang clan like this? Today, I will let Dafu divorce you." Wang Li was stunned for a moment and finally reacted. She screamed angrily, "Old bastard, how dare you hit me? Dafu, you bastard, come out. My life is so bitter. Even your dad dares to hit me. How dare you?" Wang Lijua also followed his mother to beat the old village head. He cursed, "Old bastard. Who asked you to hit my mother? Who asked you to hit my mother?" Wang Dafu came out in a panic and saw that his wife was fighting with his father. His son was also inside, so he immediately went up to stop them. Who knew that he wouldn't be able to stop them? Soon, he became the target of Wang Li and her son's beating. Su Li shook her head repeatedly and asked Fang Mu, Xiao Wu and others to stop them. Although she didn't want to meddle in the affairs of the Wang family, the old village head was still useful. If his brain was damaged, it would be bad. Fang Mu had cultivation, so his strength was great. Soon, he separated the 4 people who were wrestling together. The old village head's lips trembled. He kept breathing heavily and stared at Wang Li fiercely. Wang Dafu sighed and covered his wound. Wang Lijua was inevitably injured by accident. He did not feel it when they were fighting, but after they separated, he felt pain all over his body and immediately cried. What a sin! The old village head wailed and went back to the house with the help of Xiaowu to end the farce. At dinner time, Su Li received the invitation of the Wang family to go downstairs for dinner. After she went downstairs, she saw the 3 members of the Wang family sitting at the table with bruised noses and swollen faces. A light flashed through her eyes. Then she walked over calmly and sat at the table. Wang Li immediately smiled politely and said, "Thank you for coming, Mississippi. These dishes are the specialties of our Dawang village. I don't know if they suit your taste." "Madam, you must be joking. I am also from a poor family. There is nothing I can't get used to," Su Li said and picked up the chopsticks. She picked up a piece of game and ate it slowly. Wang Li saw that Su Li ate elegantly and thought that Su Li was just joking. She didn't believe that poor families would teach their children table manners. Wang Lijua stared at Su Li. The daughters of the villagers were exposed to the wind and sun all day long. Their skin was dark and they didn't have any temperament. He had never seen such a beautiful elder sister like Su Li. In his eyes, it seemed that Su Li's every frown and smile were shining, just like the fairy daughter in the book. "I haven't introduced him to you, Mississippi. This is my son, Wang Lijua." Wang Li smiled and held Wang Lijua's hand. Although he is a little naughty, he is now a student of the school in the town. He has learned a lot of poems and songs. "Miss, maybe you can't win him in an argument." "Really? He is really a little genius." Su Li's expression didn't change and she said with a faint smile. Xiaowu and others who were standing by the door couldn't help but laugh. Wang Li really dared to say anything. At this moment, Wang Lijua suddenly stood up from his seat. He pointed at Su Li and said loudly to Wang Li, "Mother, I want to marry her." Puff! Wang Dafu, who was still drinking tea, was so shocked that he spat saliva on Wang Li's face. Wang Li stared blankly at Wang Lijua, who was only 10 years old. Even Fang Mu and others who were standing outside the door couldn't help but turn around and poke their heads out to look into the room. The whole room suddenly fell into a strange silence. Wang Lijue looked at his mother's face full of saliva with disgust and said unsatisfactorily, "Why don't you speak?" "Mother, didn't you say that even the stars in the sky will be picked for me? You also said that the women I like are all their honor. I like her. Let her marry me, okay?" The cold sweat on Wang Li's face instantly came down. She quickly covered Wang Lijue's mouth and said with an apologetic smile, "I'm sorry to frighten you. Zhua is still young and a child's words carry no harm. Please don't blame me." Su Li slowly took the bowl and took a sip of the soup. She was still smiling, but it made Wang Li couldn't help but feel cold. Was this the momentum of a miss from a big family? It was so terrible. "I don't blame you." Su Li put down the bowl and said indifferently, "But today, Su Li has seen the world. It seems that your child's education needs to be improved. Yes, yes, yes. Miss Su is right." Wang Dafu held down Wang Lijue, who was constantly struggling. He immediately stood up and bowed to Su Li fiercely, "My family is unfortunate. I will discipline my son well in the future. I'm really sorry." Su Li took the towel handed by Mammy Li and wiped her mouth. "Enjoy your meal." "Excuse me." Then, before the couple of Wang family asked her to stay, she turned around and walked up the stairs, as if Su Li was the master here, not Wang Dafu's home. As Xiao Wu and others left with Su Li, there were only 3 members of the Wang family in the central room. Wang Dafu's chest violently rose and fell. He had never wanted to strangle his son more than now. He even dared to flirt with a miss from a big family from the Qinghe town. "You taught a good son." Wang Dafu pounded the table fiercely and finally took out some of the spirit that a man should have. "Now don't talk about money. If the Su family investigates, what should we do?" "Wang Dafu." Wang Li let go of her hand that covered her son's mouth and pointed at Wang Dafu's swollen eyes. She scolded again, "You bastard. Since that old bastard came back, you have become more daring. You scold me again. I'll beat you to death." When Wang Lijue saw his parents start fighting again, he felt that he was being completely ignored. Immediately, anger rose in his heart. He picked up the stool and smacked the back of the couple, causing them to stagger and fall on the table full of food. "Ouch! My waist." Wang Li climbed up from the table. Her body was covered with all kinds of soup, vegetables, and leaves. She turned around and saw her son, who was still holding the stool, angrily. She was so angry that her heart, liver, spleen, lungs, and kidneys tangled together. Her eyes were red. She pulled Wang Lijue's trousers and slapped him fiercely. "You bastard. You even beat your mother. How did your mother spoil you? You ungrateful wolf, don't you remember?" "Wow!" Wang Lijue was beaten and cried loudly. Wang Dafu climbed up embarrassedly. Seeing this scene, his mind was in a mess and a feeling of extreme exhaustion came to his heart. If it weren't for the salary of the village head, he really didn't want to stay at home for a moment. Mammy Li listened to the noise downstairs. She was so upset that she couldn't sleep. She couldn't help but get up and said to Su Li, who was sitting in meditation on the bed, "Miss, the Wang family is too messy. Let's move to the inn in the town." Su Li opened her eyes calmly and said, "It's desolate here. There may not be an inn. Let's wait for Fang Yuan and others to come back." Mammy Li nodded. Yes, she didn't know where Master Fang Yuan and others were sent by the miss. Why hadn't they come back yet? After midnight, the Wang family finally felt tired. There was no sound on the first floor. It was a silent night. The next morning, before Wang Dafu got up, a villager knocked on the door. He opened the door and saw that the person who came was the village's most nosy big mouth. He suddenly felt strange. Why did this woman come to his house? Village head. The village woman was happy and said, "Someone from our Dewang village comes again." What? Wang Dafu was stunned. Just serving Miss Su was enough to make him tremble with fear, and now there was another one. "It's not what you think." The village woman waved her hand and said, "It's not a miss who comes to play. It's a group of people from the broker house who want to buy children." Wang Dafu suddenly understood and then said with a strange face, "Then why do you come to my house?" He only had one son, Wang Lijua. Although his son was a bastard, he couldn't sell Wang Lijua. "Hey! It's different this time. I'm kind enough to remind you." The village woman said unhappily, "This time the boss of the broker house is very extraordinary. The children sold to the broker house before are worth a bag of food at most. This time they want to collect good seedlings. If you want to sell them, but you can't pass the test, they won't necessarily accept you." "Really?" Wang Dafu was surprised and said, "Now even the broker house is so particular about buying children. I think the broker house has an extraordinary background. It's definitely not a swindler." They are now setting up a stall at the entrance of the village. They also said that even if they don't sell them, they can get money if they send their children to do the test. It's such a good thing. How can I not inform you? Wang Dafu was immediately moved by the village woman's words. It would be a waste if he didn't take advantage of it. Besides, Wang Lijua was beaten by her mother yesterday and he didn't go to school today. It was better to send him to have a test. The village woman left after informing them. She took the money from the broker house. The more she informed, the more she would get. Naturally, she had to work harder. Although Wang Dafu had decided to send Wang Lijua, he still discussed with Wang Li, "Good thing. Send Zhua there quickly." Wang Li's eyes brightened when she heard that she could get money. If she didn't go, she wouldn't be Wang Li. After the discussion, they immediately carried Wang Lijua, who was still sleeping, to the entrance of the village. Just after the Wang family left, Fang Yuan and the other two finally rushed back to the Dawang village. They passed by the entrance of the village and saw a group of people. They didn't look at them and went directly to Su Li's residence. "According to your request, I bought all the versions of the maps in the nearby towns." On the second floor, Su Li and the old village head sat opposite each other. Fang Yuan stood in front of them and spread out brand new maps. Some of them were made of silk cloth, and some were made of rice paper. Just by looking at the materials, it could be known that the maps were expensive. The old village head's eyelids were trembling. How much money would it cost? It seemed that Su Li was really a rich girl. She really wanted to build a yard in the nearby mountain. "Hey, what map is this?" He could see from the change of expression that Su Li was very interested in the last dangerous place mentioned by the old village head. "Hiya! Hiya! Hiya!" 5 fine horses that could travel 1,000 miles a day set off, stirring up a cloud of dust along the way. Yin Xuedong stared at the slender figure on the horse in the front. She said, "If the secret base is built, the Linli building will have a place to train talents." "Su Li, do you really want to establish a force comparable to the royal family of Nanjiang country to compete with it? But if that's the case, wouldn't it take too long?" She, Yin Xuedong, was once a high-ranking member of her family who was in charge of a force. She naturally knew that cultivating a profound force required not only financial resources, but also time. Yin Xuedong kept all kinds of doubts in her heart and did not ask any more questions. Because she knew that even if she asked, she might not get the answer. More importantly, they had no other way to go except the road given by Su Li. 2 days later, Su Li and others finally came to the towering mountain mentioned by the old village head. The mountain road was too steep, so they could only tie the horses to the trees at the foot of the mountain and walk up the mountain. Fortunately, all 5 of them had cultivation. Even so, their speed did not decrease. But they didn't know if there was something wrong with the location given by the old village head. They searched the whole mountain all night, but they did not find any place that matched the description of the old village head. "It's so strange. Did the old man remember it wrong?" Chu Qingning was so depressed that he had a toothache. He wandered in the woods all night and felt dizzy. "Why don't we change the place? After all, 40 years have passed, and the terrain may have changed. It is possible that the place mentioned by the old village head no longer exists. Yin Xuedong couldn't help but suggest. Fang Yuan looked at Su Li and saw that she was staring at the map in a daze. Chu Qingning was about to disturb her, but Fang Yuan waved his hand to stop him. Chu Qingning pursed his lips and sat next to Yin Xuedong. They whispered while waiting for Su Li's decision. Fang Yuan crossed his arms and leaned against the tree for a rest. From time to time, he glanced at Su Li, who was thinking and rowing on the ground. Another day and night passed. Chu Qingning and Yin Xuedong couldn't whisper, so they found some hay from the woods and spread it on the ground to sleep. Fang Mu also wanted to rub the hay, but Yin Xuedong didn't like it. So, he found a tree branch and lay down. Fang Yuan also felt tired, but Su Li still sat in the same place. There were many incomprehensible patterns on the ground, like arithmetic and sacrificial incantations that only a few members of the Wu clan knew. What the hell are you doing? Fang Yuan thought. Finally, he closed his eyes and leaned on the branch to have a rest. He didn't reach the inborn realm, so he was still weaker than Su Li. Not long after he fell asleep, he finally heard a familiar whisper. I haven't used it for a long time, so I can't remember a lot of things. It took me a whole day and a night. If he knows it, he will definitely scold me again. Fang Yuan suddenly opened his eyes and happened to see Su Li's comfortable and brilliant smile. It seemed that the light in front of him was brighter, which made his mind unconsciously ripple. But then he noticed that the smile seemed to be mixed with a touch of memory and missing. Who was he? Fang Yuan's heart sank. He began to doubt whether there was one more enemy besides Lingli. Fang Yuan, wake them up. Let's go. Su Li's order made Fang Yuan come to his sense. He immediately pretended to be indifferent. He picked up the sheath on the side, walked to Chu Qingning, and poked his face hard. Chu Qingning woke up in a daze. When he opened his eyes, he saw Fang Yuan, who was as expressionless as a coffin board. He thought it was bad luck and woke up Yin Xuedong, who was still sleeping. As for Fang Mu, Fang Yuan directly cut off the branch behind him. With the sound of free fall, Fang Mu fell and screamed. He woke up completely. Tut tut, you deserve to be my brother. Chu Qingning smiled and said, fortunately, both Xuedong and I slept on the ground. Otherwise, it would be really uncomfortable to fall like this. Fang Mu looked at Fang Yuan with grievance. Seeing that his elder brother was gloomy and in a bad mood, he didn't dare to say a word. The 5 people went on the road again. Su Li didn't stop. She went straight to the mountainside. It only took a quarter of an hour to reach the destination. It was a bare stone platform with nothing. We have passed here several times, haven't we? Chu Qingning squatted down and touched the new grass under his feet with his fingers. Then he looked at the bare mountain wall with a strange look and said, there is nothing here. It doesn't look like there is a valley in the terrain. Su Li stood in front of the mountain wall and deduced. Then she took a deep breath and used the strength of her palm to hit the mountain wall. Boom! A deafening roar resounded in everyone's ears. Fang Yuan thought that Su Li would hit a lot of mountain stones, but he saw that the latter was blasted out at a faster speed and was shaken off the cliff in the blink of an eye. Su Li! Chu Qingning and others exclaimed in horror. The sudden change was unexpected and there was no time for them to help. Fang Yuan's pupils shrank. He rushed to the edge of the mountain and was about to jump down. However, Su Li had already come up from the cliff and gently held Fang Yuan's hand to stop his forward momentum. She said, it's okay for me to go down, but it's not necessarily for you. Don't do stupid things. Feeling the softness from his fingertips, Fang Yuan's face turned red. After hearing the latter's words, he stopped breathing and his whole body was full of vigor. He must break through the inborn realm as soon as possible. Su Li, are you okay? Seeing Su Li coming, Yin Xuedong couldn't help but ask with concern. Su Li shook her head slightly and continued to calculate against the mountain wall. Chu Qingning tooted and said, "This is the inborn realm. After the purification, her body is as light as a feather. She doesn't get hurt even if she falls down. If we go down, most of us will die, a living young master." Yin Xuedong looked at Su Li's back with admiration in her beautiful eyes. Boom! Su Li slammed on the mountain wall again, and the sound made everyone's head hurt. Su Li was shaken far away again. But this time, she controlled the strength and was not shaken off the cliff. Fang Yuan didn't look at Su Li anymore. He directly sat down with his legs crossed and took out the AO sword skills to read. The other three people didn't have Fang Yuan's tenacious belief. They couldn't understand the swordsmanship book in the continuous roars. They could only stay a little farther away, practice in 3 different places, and watch the surroundings. Although few people in the martial arts circle came to the Dahan country, it was better to be careful. Su Li constantly bombarded the mountain wall for the whole day. Fang Yuan gradually saw the pattern. Every time, Su Li adjusted the angle and strength. It seemed that she was looking for something. And every time, the counterforce from the mountain wall became smaller and smaller in the process of Su Li's constant adjustment. The moonlight shone through the dense leaves. Su Li looked tired, but she was very excited. She had already determined where it was, and just now, she had found the weakest point. Without hesitation, she pressed her right palm on the mountain wall. Her palm spat out. Finally, the mountain wall didn't make a deafening sound. Instead, it broke like a piece of thin paper with a pop sound. Immediately, the scene in front of him shook a few times like water ripples, and the scene in front of him was completely different. Fang Yuan was rarely shocked. He slowly stood up and looked at the new world that suddenly appeared. He was speechless. Tactical Matrix. Chapter 121. Chu Qingning and the other 2 heard the noise and came. When they saw the scene in front of them, they couldn't help but take a deep breath. There is a cave here. If Su Li didn't insist on staying here and blasting the mountain wall, they couldn't believe that the belly under the hard mountain rock was empty. Casually making 2 torches, the group slowly entered the tunnel. This mountain road is rugged and uneven. Is it formed naturally? Chu Qingning leaned against the wall and looked carefully. He couldn't help but ask. Indeed. Su Li was surprised and said, not only the cave, but also the tactical matrix in front of the cave is formed naturally. It only has the ability to trap people, but not to kill. Old village head, you're lucky to come out from inside. Chu Qingning suddenly understood. Yin Xuedong's eyes were full of splendor. The tactical matrix was a profound skill that could only be touched by the real martial arts circle. The Yin family, the Fang family and the Chu family existed in Nanjiang country. They could only be regarded as half of the martial arts circle at most. Now she was more and more suspicious that Su Li was not a child of the Su family in the Desu town. She probably had another origin. The mountain road was not complicated, and it became narrower and narrower. At the end, there was only a space of 10 square meters, but Su Li was very satisfied. With the development of this place and the natural tactical matrix at the entrance, there was no more suitable training base in Dahan country. She came here just for a beginning. If there was no suitable place near Dawang village, she would find another remote place for the base. But she didn't expect that the old village head gave her a big surprise. In this way, we can select the suitable seedlings to train. But Yin Xuedong hesitated and asked, how to develop this place? If we let the craftsmen come here, it will be exposed in vain. If we kill them, it doesn't matter. I have my own way. Su Li didn't say it clearly, but a faint light flashed in her eyes. After another 3 days, Chu Qingning and others were impatient. Su Li finally took out a wooden token engraved with a strange mark. With this wooden token, you can freely enter it. You don't need to work as hard as last time. Is there really such a magical thing? Chu Qingning took the wooden token and looked at the entrance of the cave, which had been restored to the mountain wall. In the past 3 days, the natural tactical matrix had restored itself and returned to its original appearance. Since you're so interested, I'll let you try. Su Li handed the wooden token to Chu Qingning. Chu Qingning looked bitter. When he looked back, he saw that Yin Xuedong and others were watching the show with great interest. He could only shake his head helplessly and walk towards the mountain wall. It seemed that he was going to hit the wall on purpose. Just when Yin Xuedong and others thought that Chu Qingning was going to hit the hard stone wall, the wooden token suddenly emitted a faint shimmer. The whole stone wall rippled like the surface of a lake. Then Chu Qingning seemed to be integrated into the stone wall and went in without any hindrance. There's actually such a magical thing in the world. Chu Qingning excitedly shuttled back and forth. After Yin Xuedong and others played with them for a few times, they went back home. Now that they had found the address, they didn't have to waste any more time in Dewang village. It was 6 days after they returned to Dewang village. When Su Li and others returned on horseback, they found that the whole village was filled with a faint desolation. Did something happen? Fang Yuan and others looked serious. This atmosphere was not like a normal fishing village by the sea. They immediately rushed to Wang Dafu's house. They saw that half of the courtyard wall outside the small building collapsed. There were 2 white lanterns hanging on the small door. Obviously, someone died. Su Li raised her eyebrows and walked in. But she didn't see any mourning hall. There was only a straw mat on the ground, and a corpse was wrapped in it. Fang Yuan immediately stepped forward and uncovered the straw mat. When he saw that the person lying on the straw mat was not Mammy Li, he was slightly relieved. Then he pursed his lips and turned back to whisper, "It's the old village head. He was killed with 1 blow." He was at least a warrior in the acquired 3rd hurdle. When everyone heard that, except for Su Li who was expressionless, their expressions changed. Especially Fang Mu, who had the most contact with the old village head, his eyes were burning with anger. "Woo, woo, 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 my poor child," there was a faint cry in the room. Su Li stepped forward and pushed the door open. Suddenly, she saw Wang Dafu, his wife and Mammy Li. Wang Li was not as rude as before. She seemed to have lost her soul. Her tears kept flowing and she was murmuring. Wang Dafu's state was not much better. He didn't know how many days he had not changed his clothes. The bloodstains on his clothes had turned brown. "Miss, you are finally back." Mammy Li looked up and saw Su Li and others. She was overjoyed and quickly grabbed Su Li's hand. She said, "Something bad happened, miss. Since you left, a group of people came and took away the grandson of the Wang family on the 3rd night. Xiaowu and others tried to stop them, but they were also caught. The old village head was killed with 1 blow. The children of many families in the village have disappeared. What a sin. Who are the people? Do you have any clues?" Su Li frowned. It had been 3 days since Mammy Li said that. She couldn't have a clue. It must be them. Before Mammy Li said anything, Wang Li suddenly came back to her senses. She was excited and knelt in front of Su Li. She pulled Su Li's trousers and begged, "Miss Su, please save my son." 6 days ago. Wang Li told Su Li what happened in the past few days. It turned out that 6 days ago, the day Su Li and others left, a group of people dressed in rich clothes came to the village. They said they came to buy children. Even if they didn't sell the children, they could get a lot of money. At this time, it was the spring closed fishing season, and the village had no income. Hearing such a good news, all the families in the village immediately sent their children to the hospital. Wang Li was no exception. She still remembered that after the children were sent to the hospital, the middleman also praised Wang Lijua. She was rewarded with 10 taels of silver. She was very happy at that time. For 3 days, the middleman stayed here and didn't leave. They checked all the children in the village. Many families couldn't afford it, so they took this time to sell their children for a good price. When the whole village was in a jubilant mood, something big happened on the third night. Most of the children in the village were stolen secretly. Only Wang Dafu's family noticed it. At that time, the old village head just got up at night. When he saw a group of black shadows holding Wang Lijua, he immediately shouted and rushed to them with a shovel. Unexpectedly, he was killed in one move. When Xiaowu and Datian came out and saw it, they immediately rushed to them like crazy. But they were no match for the black shadows. Soon, they were controlled by the black shadows and taken away. Wang Dafu and his wife heard the sound and came out. When they saw such a tragic scene, they didn't dare to go out. After the black shadows left, Wang Dafu helped his father up with trembling hands. His face was full of tears. Since her son was caught, Mrs. Wang didn't have the mood to decorate the morning hall. Only Wang Dafu still had a little conscience. He hung 2 white lanterns at the door. Mammy Li said in a low voice. She had seen the whole thing clearly. She naturally added some words that Wang Li was ashamed to say to Su Li abducting a boy and a girl. And they even looked at the root bone. Su Li was lost in thought, but she couldn't help but frown slightly. Of course, she knew that the group of people coming was definitely not a broker house. But there were too many sects and forces that could do such a thing just based on this clue. How could she know which one it was? Fang Yuan also looked gloomy. Even Su Li felt it was tricky. They were even more confused and at a loss. Miss Su. Fang Mu stood up. After the anger, he became calm. He still remembered his current identity and didn't call her too casually. Su Li raised her head, and there was an inquiry in her eyes. Fang Mu avoided the sight of the Wang couple. He gritted his teeth and took out a butterfly-like stone from his arms. He whispered, "This should be helpful." When Fang Yuan saw what Fang Mu took out, his expression changed dramatically. He stepped forward and grabbed Fang Mu's collar. There was a killing intent in his eyes. He said, "Why do you have this thing?" Fang Yuan looked bitter, but he didn't mean to defend himself. Su Li raised her eyebrows and asked Chu Qingning to send the Wang couple back to the room. Then she stepped forward and took the butterfly-like stone. She said softly, "The poisonous insect tracing is a 3rd-grade odor insect. It is very precious. It is probably the natal poisonous insect of the head of the Fang family." Fang Yuan, am I right? Fang Yuan didn't answer Su Li. He still stared at Fang Mu with a pair of cold eyes. He asked word by word, "How is my father?" "Eldest brother, just kill me." Fang Mu closed his eyes painfully. He had long known that if he took it out, it would inevitably make Fang Yuan furious. If he didn't want to avenge the old village head and save Xiaowu and others, he would keep this secret forever. He couldn't bear the pain of losing his eldest brother. "Fang Yuan, don't be impatient." Su Li patted the latter's tight shoulder and said, "It is impossible to get the natal poisonous insect of the poisonous insect clan by force. Moreover, the poisonous insect is in the state of resting and intact. It is impossible for Fang Mu to forcibly take it from your father. If you have time to be angry, you might as well ask your brother how your father died." Fang Yuan's body trembled slightly. He was silent for a long time and finally let Fang Mu go. As the young patriarch, he certainly knew the characteristics of the natal poisonous insect above the 3rd grade. Since the natal poisonous insect was taken out, it naturally meant that his biological father had died. As a collateral relative, Fang Mu was not qualified to know the secrets of the 3rd grade natal poisonous insect. After hearing Su Li's words, he suddenly felt guilty. He knelt down and bowed his head, saying, "I'm sorry, eldest brother. I am afraid of being misunderstood by you. If I had known this, I would have given the poisonous insect to you as soon as possible. I am wrong." Fang Yuan raised his head so that people couldn't see his face clearly. His slightly trembling voice came out, "My father, how did he die?" Fang Mu's eyes showed hatred when he heard the words. He said, Mou Tian, the general of the royal family of Nanjiang country. If he hadn't plotted against the head of the Fang family, our Fang family wouldn't have been reduced to this. I used the secret skill to escape at that time. Later, I was deliberately caught by the Dahan country and became a prisoner of war. I met the head of the family. If he hadn't used his last strength to prolong my life for me, I wouldn't have been able to see you. Fang Mu was about to tell Fang Yuan all kinds of secrets that happened in that year, but he was interrupted by Su Li. Okay. Even if you tell these things, what can you do? Fang Mu's tone was stagnant, and he suddenly felt bitter. That's right, even if they did, would they be able to take revenge now? Yin Xuedong and Chu Qingning's eyes darkened, and they both fell into silence. Clap. Su Li clapped her hands and handed the poisonous insect of Miles tracing to Fang Mu. She said, let's take care of the things in front of us first. We will naturally take revenge in the future. Fang Yuan, you wake it up, and it can be regarded as the inheritance of your Fang family. Hurry up. Fang Yuan took over the poisonous insect. Without saying anything, he held the sword and cut a small wound on his chest near his heart. Then his lips slightly wriggled. The butterfly poisonous insect actually came to life, and then it lay on Fang Yuan's chest and sucked the blood. Just in the blink of an eye, Fang Yuan felt that most of the pneuma and blood in his body were gone, and he almost fell down. At this moment, a white and slender palm was printed on his back. In an instant, his internal organs were wrapped by warm green light, and his hematopoietic ability increased rapidly, which actually caught up with the loss of the poisonous insect's sucking blood. After a full hour, the gray and stone-like poisonous insect returned to the colorful butterfly. It spread its wings and gently fell on Fang Yuan's shoulder. The movement was intimate. Chapter 122. Turning around, Fang Yuan, whose face was still a little pale, looked at Su Li with some gratitude in his eyes. But Su Li said slowly with a faint smile, the third-grade poisonous insect only absorbed 5 times the blood essence in your body. I thought it absorbed 10 times. After all, without the help of auxiliary medicine, only the inborn realm can directly refine the third-grade poisonous insect. It seems that your father had dealt with it before taking it out. With the blood relationship between you and your father, he relieved half of the burden for you. Fang Yuan looked gloomy, but Su Li looked at Fang Mu and said, but if you didn't refine the poisonous insect, this poisonous tracing insect would explode like fireworks in other people's bodies. It would make people die without leaving any bones. Seeing Su Li make an explosive action, Fang Mu felt numb. Fortunately, he didn't try to refine the poisonous insect, otherwise, hearing this, Fang Yuan's eyes were filled with tenderness. At the same time, he also felt guilty in his heart. He shouldn't have done that to Fang Mu just now. Fang Mu scratched his head and smirked. Before he said anything, he was directly interrupted by Su Li. Well, Fang Yuan, the poisonous tracing insect has been activated for you. Now find out where Xiaowu and others are. Okay. Fang Yuan looked serious. He took out the unwashed clothes of Xiaowu and Datian from the room and put them in front of the butterfly. The butterfly gently touched the clothes twice and immediately flew away. Su Li and others instantly followed it and went away. Mammy Li stayed in the room and watched this scene. She couldn't help but sigh with emotion. The people around the miss really had endless means. She watched the miss grow up from an early age, but she still didn't understand why the miss suddenly had so many strange skills. However, Su Li and others followed the poisonous tracing insect all the way to the north. The further they went, the more desolate it was. Finally, they stopped in front of a yard in the mountain. The yard was surrounded by mountains on all sides. There was only one entrance, and it was heavily guarded. The nearby mountains were rugged, which was easy to defend and difficult to attack. It seems that this is the secret of a certain force. Chu Qingning couldn't help but say. He looked back and saw Fang Yuan put the poisonous insect back into the wound on his chest and formed a butterfly mark. He couldn't help but smile. Fang Yuan, your mark is beautiful, but it is too unmanly. Look at me. Chu Qingning said, revealing the round stone-like mark on his heart, which was dark and heavy. You still have time to talk about this at a time like this? Yin Xuedong was so angry that she pinched Chu Qingning's abdomen and scolded him in a low voice. Chu Qingning immediately shrank his neck and became serious. Fang Yuan didn't have time to pay attention to Chu Qingning. He walked to Su Li and looked at the entrance, which was constantly patrolled by red-robed men. He asked, how is it? Should we force our way in or sneak in? Su Li shook her head slightly. She took out a small white bottle and handed it to Fang Yuan, one for each person. There are many traps here. It would not be easy to force his way in. However, based on the way they walk and the techniques they use, I can tell which force they belong to. You can even tell that? Chu Qingning couldn't help but be surprised. He could see the practice method from a group of small guards. How profound was his knowledge of Xiangong? It was difficult for him to even see through the techniques of his own clan. Su Li glanced at Chu Qingning and continued, it's the blood refining hall. Blood refining hall. Yin Xuedong frowned slightly. It sounds familiar. I seem to have heard of it somewhere. It turns out to be them. Chu Qingning suddenly understood and said, it's a frequent killer organization in Dehan country, Nanjiang country, and Zhushou country, and it's famous. It's second only to the mysterious Shalu cult. Hearing the two words, Shalu cult, the figure of Ling Mo flashed in Su Li's mind. Recently, she didn't hear any rumors about the Yinma cult. Presumably, they should be living well in Yunjing. Thinking of that night when she killed two inborn elders of the blood refining hall in the wilderness, Su Li's eyes flashed with coldness. The blood refining hall was really haunting her and repeatedly fought against her. Take the elixir in the bottle. Su Li ordered. Fang Yuan and others took the elixir without saying anything. Then Su Li took a black burning incense and floated to the air vent to light it. The colorless and odorless smoke slowly blew into the yard along with the wind. Fang Yuan and others were speechless when they saw it. They had thought that there would be a tough battle, but Su Li unexpectedly poisoned them. Su Li came down from the air vent empty-handed. She squinted her eyes and said with a smile, the blood refining hall has countless yards to train killers secretly. Each yard has at least 3 inborn elders. Even if I can defeat them, I may not be able to kill them. It's easier to poison them, isn't it? Fang Yuan's face trembled. Chu Qingning and others were even more embarrassed. They all felt cold in their hearts. They used to be in a decent sect, so it took time for them to get used to Su Li's way of doing things. Plop, plop, plop. However, after 10 minutes, Chu Qingning and others saw the guards at the entrance fell down one by one. Su Li immediately ordered them to cover their faces and went in. She also put on a black cloak. Her figure turned into a flickering light and went into the dense building complex of the yard. In the silence, Chu Qingning and others immediately looked for the whereabouts of Xiaowu and others separately. Su Li's expression under the veil was very calm. She didn't look for Xiaowu, but jumped to the 3 luxurious courtyards in the deepest part of the yard. She dragged out 2 men and a woman and put them on the ground. They were all dressed in red elder costumes of the blood refining hall. Then, she raised her hand and the sword fell. 3 inborn seniors were beheaded in their sleep and died very peacefully. Su Li wiped the blood on the sword expressionlessly. The blood refining hall would become the obstacle of the Shalu cult and the Linli building in the future. Now that she encountered it, she naturally needed to get rid of future troubles as soon as possible. The black incense she took out was the strongest poison that could be made now. If the cultivation of the inborn seniors was not higher than the 3rd hurdle, they would sleep for a quarter of an hour. If the cultivation of the inborn seniors was higher than the 3rd hurdle, the incense would be ineffective. It seems that this yard is not an important place of the blood refining hall. Otherwise, only 3 elders who were lower than the 3rd hurdle would be sent to guard it. Su Li thought so. After destroying the corpses, she left the courtyard and turned to find Fang Yuan and others. Su Li, come here quickly. Soon after walking out of the courtyard, Su Li heard Chu Qingning's exclamation from the west. She rushed to a house with a strong smell of blood and immediately frowned. At this time, Chu Qingning came out from inside with an extremely ugly face. Yin Xuedong also came out with a pale face. After walking a few steps, he vomited on the side. I found Xiaowu and the others in the east courtyard. The children of the Dewang village are all unconscious. Fang Yuan arrived from the east. When he saw Chu Qingning's expression, he was slightly shocked and immediately followed Su Li into the house silently. The light in the house was extremely dim. The pungent smell of blood came to Fang Yuan's face. Suddenly, he felt that he kicked something soft under his feet. He looked down. It was a bloody arm. It was very fresh and the port was still gurgling with blood. Fang Yuan's pupils shrank violently. Then he noticed that the foot was sticky. It was the stickiness caused by the half-dried blood. Taking a deep breath, Fang Yuan tried his best to see the scene in the house. Even though he had been trained on the battlefield, he couldn't help but be shocked. It was not an exaggeration to call it hell. In the spacious house, there were all kinds of instruments of torture. Those instruments of torture were dyed black by blood. Some barbs were even stained with blood and flesh. A teenager, who seemed to be about the same age as them, was tied to the torture frame. His limbs had completely disappeared and scattered on the ground. Fang Yuan looked back at the broken arm at the door. It was the teenager's. What's wrong? Why do you have to cut off his limbs? Become a human stick. Fang Mu's eyes were red. He gasped and looked around. Then he saw that there were a lot of wooden barrels with the height of half a person on the 4 walls. Heads were exposed from the barrels, emitting a faint breathing sound. Obviously, they were still alive. All of them are human sticks. Fang Mu was so scared that he stepped back a few steps. He accidentally stepped on something. Crack. He looked back and saw that there were broken limbs piled up in the corner. Some of them had turned into bones. The blood refining hall is simply insane. Chu Qingning hammered the wall fiercely. Then he grabbed the man of the blood refining hall who fainted on the ground and still held the instruments of torture in his hands. He cut off his neck with a knife. The blood sprayed on the ground. Su Li just looked at him indifferently. She didn't even show any resentment. Ah! Chu Qingning let out a repressed roar. Even if he killed the man, he didn't feel happy at all. Su Li had said before that there were countless such places in the blood refining hall. At this time, Su Li's indifferent voice came, Chu Qingning, kill them all. Chu Qingning looked up in amazement. He saw that Su Li pointed at the group of teenagers with sticks. He was shocked in his heart and couldn't believe it. Su Li sneered, do you think they still want to live after being like this? Let them die without knowing anything. That's what you should do now. Chu Qingning clenched his fists and felt pain. His face was livid. Looking at dozens of barrels on the wall, his eyes actually shed tears. Then he groaned and picked up the long knife to cut them. Puff! Puff! One head after another was thrown down. Soon Fang Mu joined in. The smell of blood in the room was heavier. Yin Xuedong held the door and choked with sobs. Fang Yuan sighed deeply and looked at Su Li, who was expressionless all the time. She should be angry, right? Or was she really calm? In fact, if I don't give them the antidote, after 6 hours, there will be no one alive in this yard. Su Li's voice suddenly sounded, which made Fang Yuan's heart tremble. He turned his head with his eyes full of disbelief. Then why did you let them? It may be a baptism for them. Su Li's eyes fell on Fang Yuan and she smiled deeply, you are much calmer than them. You should have seen such a scene, in the Fang family. No. Fang Yuan was immediately stimulated and said angrily, the Fang family can't do such a terrible thing. It's the military camp of Nanjiang. I see. Su Li showed a look of understanding, but she didn't say it at all. In the military camp, people with sticks are mostly used to vent anger and train courage. It seems that you have a little status in the military camp. No. Fang Yuan said in a low tone and pointed to the barrel, I almost became like this, so I ran away. Su Li was slightly stunned and then nodded gently. She looked at Chu Qingning and Fang Mu, who seemed to be crazy, and said nothing. An hour later, Chu Qingning and Fang Mu were pale and covered with blood. As soon as they walked out of the house, they felt weak and collapsed on the ground. Su Li shook her head and turned to the east courtyard to feed Xiaowu and others the antidote. Then she moved them to the handcart of the blood refining hall one by one and prepared to send them to the nearest town. After everyone was transported out, Fang Yuan skillfully poured black oil and threw torches. Soon the whole yard was in a sea of fire. The secret stronghold was destroyed, and the blood refining hall would definitely send people to investigate it. The fire still had to be set. On the handcart, Chu Qingning lay flat and looked at the fire in the mountains. The black smoke rushed to the sky. His eyes gradually focused. The mountain wind blew, as if God was sighing. Chapter 123. Chu Qingning didn't expect Su Li to answer. Even if Su Li knew the mental method of Xiangong of the blood refining hall, it was impossible for her to know the means and purposes of the blood refining hall. However, Su Li glanced at him and said, Chu Qingning, how talented are you? Chu Qingning turned his head in amazement and immediately saw Su Li sitting on the other side of the handcart looking at him. When I was a child, my father said that I had excellent aptitude and had a chance to reach the inborn realm. Chu Qingning answered honestly. Su Li couldn't help but smile and said, if someone like you enters the blood refining hall, he will become an elder, not a stick. Chu Qingning was suddenly stunned. He heard the hidden meaning in Su Li's words. The conclusion of a person's aptitude is not accurate only by touching the bone. We can know the result only when we really practice. Do you think the blood refining hall is doing good deeds? Chu Qingning shook his head quickly. The vicious blood refining hall certainly wouldn't do good deeds. So, the new blood who enters the blood refining hall is either good or bad. A group of people is destined to be eliminated. If you are the lord of the blood refining hall, will you easily let those people go? Su Li asked again. Chu Qingning looked terrible. After hesitating for a moment, he finally shook his head. According to the style of the blood refining hall, how could they do a losing business? Since they spent money on those people, they should get it back. Su Li said in a relaxed tone, as if she was not talking about a bloody thing at all, so, those teenagers will be cut into sticks. After their injuries are healed, they will appear in the streets and become qualified beggars. What they get from begging will naturally be taken by the blood refining hall. They will slowly die in despair and resentment. This is their end. Chu Qingning stopped breathing and murmured to himself, it turns out to be like this. At this moment, there was no doubt in his mind. Although he killed them by himself, he felt relaxed. Fang Mu was silent on the side, but he also showed a bitter smile. If you can't take revenge, your end is likely to be 100 times more miserable than theirs. Su Li finally said what she really wanted to say. The four people were shocked when they heard the words, and their eyes were full of hatred. So, we have to work harder. Amidst the night breeze, the girl's sigh could be heard, accompanied by the sound of the cart's wheels grinding against each other. Early the next morning, several blood-stained carriages appeared on the streets of Silver Light Town. This immediately shocked the government, and a large number of officers and soldiers were sent to cordon off the scene. Xiaowu and others came to their senses one after another. They thought that the government had saved them, so they shed tears of gratitude and told what had happened. So it's the evil sects causing trouble, the heavens will not tolerate it. My imperial court is at loggerheads with them. Investigate. I'll inform the county governor immediately. Under the command of the magistrate, the soldiers searched through the night and finally found the mountain courtyard that had been burnt to ashes. For a time, there were many rumors. Some said that the evil sects had committed too many sins and suffered the wrath of heaven, while others said that it was a case of black eating black. However, there were even more people who believed that it was the righteous sects that had taken action. Otherwise, they would not have been able to save so many survivors. After staying in the government office for 3 days, Xiaowu and other children of Dewang village were sent back. Seeing the white lanterns hanging in front of the door, Xiaowu and Datian felt sad. They pushed open the courtyard door and saw the morning hall in the house. Their tears couldn't stop flowing. Wang Lijue, who was following behind them, also had red eyes. Shua! Shua, you're back! Wang Li in the house saw Wang Lijue and immediately hugged him with ecstasy. However, Wang Lijue dodged and said with a disgusted face, "Don't touch me. I'm going to worship my grandfather." After saying that, he ignored Wang Li who was standing still and quickly ran to the coffin. Looking at the old man with a serene face in the coffin, he reached out his hand and touched the old man's cold face, which was covered with tears. "Grandpa, I was wrong. I won't listen to my mother anymore. I will go to school and become a learned person like you. If you were alive, how good it would be for me to listen to your teachings." Although he was only 10 years old, he also knew the fickleness of human nature. He woke up that night, but only his grandpa, Xiaowu, and Datian came out to stop him. The woman who said she loved him hid behind the house with the man who also said she loved him. They didn't dare to come out at all. Xiaowu knelt in front of the coffin and clenched his teeth to prevent himself from crying. He clenched his fists so hard that they were almost bleeding. If only the bodyguards had been there that night. No. If he had enough strength to resist like the bodyguard, his grandfather wouldn't have died. In order to survive in this world, one could not rely on others. In the end, one could only rely on oneself. I want to become stronger. A raging flame ignited in the youth's eyes. He could no longer tolerate something similar happening in the future. He wanted to be like his bodyguard and become stronger. Su Li and others looked upstairs. Fang Yuan couldn't help but praise, "Good eyesight." It is not too late for these two boys to start practicing now, as long as they can keep their faith. Chu Qingning touched his chin and said. Obviously, he had come out of the shadow of the blood refining hall. Xuedong, Fang Mu, what do you think? Su Li suddenly asked. Yin Xuedong and Fang Mu were shocked and immediately nodded in unison, "I will listen to Brother Qingning." After they finished speaking, both of them were startled, and their faces instantly flushed red. They stammered for a long time without being able to say anything. Su Li smiled slightly and patted Fang Yuan's shoulder, "That's settled. You can handle it." Fang Yuan was suddenly stunned. Why him? Before he could respond, he saw Xiaowu and Datian coming up from downstairs. They plopped and knelt in front of Fang Yuan. They said in unison, "Mr. Bodyguard, please accept us as your apprentice. Teach us martial arts. We are willing to do anything to repay you." Then, Xiaowu and Datian kowtowed 3 times at the same time. Fang Yuan was even more shocked. He pointed to Chu Qingning and others, "Why don't you bow to them?" Xiaowu was suddenly speechless, but Datian said innocently, "Because the eldest brother said that you look the most powerful among the Mr. Bodyguards." As soon as he said that, Chu Qingning and others looked very strange. Xiaowu's face darkened. He couldn't wait to stand up and block Datian's mouth. This silly brother really dared to say anything. Fang Yuan couldn't help laughing in his heart, but his expression didn't change. He said coldly, "I won't accept you." Xiaowu's body trembled slightly, and then he immediately relaxed. He had already known this result. Now he summoned up the courage to say it. Although he was rejected, he had no regrets. Are you two willing to join the Linli building? Fang Yuan spoke again, and his tone remained unchanged. Xiao Wu raised his head doubtfully, and his face was full of doubts. Wasn't the Linli building a winery in the Qinghe town? Were these powerful Mr. Bodyguards from the winery? Didn't Lady Su say that they were all guards of the Tianya house? Xiao Wu was confused for a while. Chu Qingning couldn't bear it and interrupted, Hey, boy, don't be so sentimental. If you join the Linli building, you can master the power you want. How do you think you two came back? Do you really think that you can be safely rescued in 3 days with just those few officers and soldiers of the government? Xiao Wu's eyes widened when he heard that, and his words trembled, Mr. Bodyguards. After we rushed back, we found that you two were missing. It took us a long time to find you. Chu Qingning sighed and patted Xiao Wu's shoulder, we have helped you to avenge your grandfather. If there is another time, you can do it yourself. Yes. Xiao Wu burst into tears and kowtowed 3 times, I am willing to join the Linli building. I will go through fire and water without hesitation. Clap. Su Li clapped her hands and said with a smile, Xiao Wu, congratulations. Don't worry about the affairs of the school. I will explain it. Well, thank you, lady. Looking at Xiao Wu's excitement, Su Li stopped smiling, and a ray of light flashed in her eyes. She had seen that Datian had an extraordinary aptitude a long time ago. If he could set foot on the martial arts circle, he would definitely have some achievements. But Datian was a little stupid and listened to Xiao Wu for everything. If she could control Xiao Wu, she would naturally control Datian. Her identity should not be known by more people. Maybe one day when Xiao Wu really grew up to be a senior of the Linli building, she would let him know who was the real owner of the Linli building. After the dust settled, Xiao Wu had no nostalgia for the Dawang village. He went downstairs to pack up and was ready to leave tomorrow. But Wang Lijue pestered him. Brother Xiao Wu, take me away. I definitely won't embarrass you, and I'll listen to you. Brother Xiao Wu. Brother Xiao Wu. Seeing that the half-grown child tied to his leg and refused to get down, Xiao Wu said helplessly, your parents won't let you go with me. Besides, it's not me who can decide whether to take you out or not, but Lord Su. Wang Lijue looked bitter. After many experiences, his wisdom grew rapidly. Then he knew that what his mother instilled in him was vulgar and extremely wrong. His heart of repentance had been awakened, but when he remembered that he had offended Su Li verbally, he felt that it was impossible. However, he still plucked up his courage and stood in front of Su Li. Su Li looked at Wang Lijue with a smile in her eyes. This boy was a little interesting. Can you tell me why you want to leave with Xiao Wu? Facing Su Li's question, Wang Lijue was nervous and said the reason that had been hovering in his heart for a long time, because I don't want to be like my parents. I know my father is very weak and what my mother said is wrong. If I stay here, I will definitely be affected by them. My grandfather woke me up, and I can't let him down. I also want to be an excellent person. Seeing that the 10-year-old Wang Lijue spoke clearly and logically, Chu Qingning couldn't help but marvel. Was this the same Wang Lijue who shouted as soon as he entered the door and behaved like his mother? Then, are you ready to suffer with Xiao Wu? Su Li smiled more and said, the outside world is not as beautiful as you think. If you give up halfway, you are likely to become a wandering beggar on the street and fight for food with wild dogs. Even if you are beaten to death on the street one day, no one will care about you. Wang Lijue's face turned pale and his eyes showed fear. After all, he was still too young. Just the scenes that Su Li said had already made him shudder. Even when Chu Qingning thought that he was going to give up, Wang Lijue's face flashed a touch of ruthlessness. If so, I only have myself to blame, and I can't blame others. Lady Su, please take me away. Chapter 124. The next day, the carriage returned to the Qinghe town with Xiao Wu and Datian's expectations for the future and Wang Lijue's anxiety. For Wang Lijue's request, Su Li temporarily allowed him to stay with Xiaowu to see the world, and Wang Li didn't stop him. In her opinion, it was a great joy that her son could get on the good side of a miss in the town. She was very happy. How could she stop him? Soon after Su Li and others left, there was a big mess in the Yingguang town. More than 100 charred corpses transported from the blood refining hall were inexplicably less than half. Only the corpses without limbs were left. The rest of the corpses seemed to have come back to life. They ran away from the mass grave without leaving any trace of human activities. The county magistrate was frightened and had a serious illness. He sent people out to find the whereabouts of the corpses, but they couldn't find them. Su Li, how can we complete the construction of the hillside? When Xiaowu and others went to prepare the dinner, Chu Qingning couldn't help but come over and whispered, "It is such a big hillside. Even if we send a team of 50 craftsmen, it will take about a month to complete it. What's more, we don't have the ability to find 50 craftsmen who can keep secrets for us. And this time, don't you draw a design drawing like the Linli building? The secluded land is not a restaurant. It doesn't need to be too fancy." Su Li responded indifferently. She didn't mention the construction of the hillside. Instead, she said, "After returning to the Qinghe town, you can start to recruit new people secretly and send them to the secluded land every half a month. As for the secluded land, I will choose one of the 4 of you to manage it." Half a month? So fast? Chu Qingning was speechless and immediately shrank his neck. He didn't want to go to the remote place and order a group of teenagers all day long. Just thinking about it made him feel painful. Besides, he didn't want to be separated from Yin Xuedong. Thinking of this, Chu Qingning leaned to Su Li's ear and suggested, "I think the most suitable ones are Fang Yuan and Luo Yichen. They both put on a grim face all day long. It is daunting just to look at them. They can definitely deter newcomers more than me." Chu Qingning lingered beside Su Li for a long time, but he didn't hear any affirmative words from her. When he heard Xiaowu calling for dinner outside, he could only leave helplessly. He still had doubts in his heart, such as why Su Li was able to clear out the mountainside in half a month. But he knew that Su Li would not answer these questions even if he asked. After Chu Qingning left, Su Li looked back at the lush and quiet mountain forest and narrowed her eyes slightly. Dead people are the best at keeping secrets, aren't they? A few days later, they finally returned to the Qinghe town. The way back was unusually peaceful. They didn't even meet a single robber. The news that this area had been wiped out half a month ago had spread. The remaining robbers didn't dare to stay here for long and all changed places. Wang Lijue entered the city and looked around. His face was full of curiosity and excitement. Xiaowu could not help but laugh. This boy used to be the same as his mother, but now he had changed his temperament, which made him pleasing to the eye. At noon, the business of the Linli building was at its peak. Su Li's carriage stopped behind the Linli building. Haydn and others were stunned for a while before they reacted. Then they were ecstatic and said, "She is back. She is back. Boss and others are all back." Mei Ruhan, who was still doing accounts in the room, immediately stood up and ran to the back door happily. When she saw Yin Xuedong looking at her with a smile, she felt sad and immediately burst into tears. Then she threw herself into Yin Xuedong's arms. "Great! You are finally back. I thought I couldn't hold on anymore." Yin Xuedong gently patted Mei Ruhan's back, and her eyes were slightly wet. Mei Ruhan could be regarded as her half-apprentice. Now it was hard for her to control the Linli building for half a month. Su Li glanced at the lively scene in the front hall and nodded with a smile, "Well done. She is like a shopkeeper." Mei Ruhan blushed and waved her hand, "It's all because of your reputation that the Linli building is not targeted by thieves." Ruhan actually didn't do anything. At this time, Luo Yichen came. His expression was still the same as that of half a month ago. It seemed that everyone owed him money. "Here's what you want." Luo Chen directly put a pink package in Su Li's hand and then turned away. He didn't want to have anything to do with this thing. Su Li looked at Luo Chen's back and was not angry. She turned to Haydn and others and asked, "How is it in the city recently?" Haydn and others were the first to follow Su Li. They had been paying attention to the movements in the city, so they directly talked at once. After an hour, everyone dispersed and the Linli building returned to normal. In the attic on the top floor, Su Li picked up a brush and wrote 2 words on the paper, Wu Yun. With the help of her 1 million taels of silver, the Yen family was not defeated in the business competition. But they didn't win all the money. The situation seemed to be in a stalemate. As the saying went, a powerful dragon could not suppress a local snake. The power of the Yen family was deeply rooted in the Qinghe town. If Wu Yun wanted to fight against it, the price to pay was definitely far more than 1 million taels of silver. Presumably, even she felt a little bit overwhelmed. There is no turning back. Wu Yun, if I were you, what would I do next? In the Qinghe girls' school, Su Li appeared at the door in a yellow gauze dress. When the guards saw Su Li, they immediately surrounded her with surprise and said with a smile, "Lecturer Su, you finally come back. We haven't seen you for half a month. We miss you very much." Su Li showed a gentle and bright smile and handed over the basket in her hand. She said, "The scenery of the Yinguang town beside the Qinghe River is good. This is a local specialty. I bought a lot. You can have a taste." The guards were overjoyed and quickly took it. Then they looked a little strange. They looked around and whispered, "Miss Su, are you really from the Su family in the Desu town?" Su Li was still smiling, but there was a trace of doubt in her eyes. She said, "Of course. Why do you ask?" The guard quickly waved his hand and said, "No, no, no. I don't doubt the identity of Lecturer Su. It's just that the temperament of your family. It's hard to imagine that they can cultivate such an excellent person as you." "Oh." Su Li's smile slowly disappeared. She said, "So, have you seen someone in the Su family?" "More than that. I have seen all of them." The guard took it for granted. Then he patted his head when he saw that Su Li was still doubtful. He said, "Look at me. It seems that you didn't know when your family came to the school." At that time, Mrs. Su was so fierce that Dean Wen was very angry. Su Li slightly pursed her lips, and a dim light flashed in her eyes. At this time, the whole Su family came to the Qinghe town. After a quarter of an hour, Su Li appeared in the courtyard of Wen Ruomin. Seeing Su Li come back, Wen Ruomin was happy at first. Then she took Su Li's hand and sat down. She frowned and asked, "Su Li, do you know that all of your family members came to the Qinghe town?" "I heard it from the guards, but I don't know what happened." Seeing Su Li's obedient answer, when Ruomin showed an indescribable expression, "I don't like to gossip behind people's backs. It's just that your parents are really, I know." Su Li looked calm and showed a faint smile, "But since I was born in the Su family, I can only accept the result. After all, God doesn't give me the right to choose my parents. Besides, I have an elder brother who loves me, and that's enough." Su Li's words made Wen Ruomin feel more distressed. She would rather Su Li tell her about the suffering she suffered in the Su family these years than bear it silently. The school never allows outsiders to come in, even the relatives of the lecturers of the school. I spent a lot of effort to send them away from the gate of the school. But I heard that they are still in the Qinghe town. They should live in the Fulian. When Ruomin told Su Li about Su Huanli and others. Then she cautiously exhorted, "I have told them that the special class lecturer of the Qinghe girls' school has no real power. Don't expose that you are the workshop owner of the embroidery workshop. Otherwise, you will be in big trouble." If the Su family really knew that Su Li was the workshop owner of the embroidery workshop, when Ruomin could imagine that Su Huanli and others would force Su Li to take advantage of her identity and give the green light to the silk shop industry of the Su family. Once the Jean family and the Lin family got hold of it, even the Yen family would be in trouble. It was not a joke. I see. Su Li nodded and looked calm. She said, even if someone told them, I would not do that. Even if I have to bear the name of unfilial, I can't let Ding Gong and you down. And she couldn't let Yan Shixuan fail in this battle. Otherwise, wouldn't her 1,000,000 taels of silver be in vain? Child, it's really hard for you. Wen Ruomin sighed deeply. She had heard from Ning Yunji that Su Li was an out-and-out filial daughter. No matter how the Su family treated her, she always had no complaints or regrets. But now, she was asked to violate her own beliefs. What a sin. After saying goodbye to Wen Ruomin, Su Li didn't go back to the courtyard of the school. Instead, she directly left the school and walked to the Fulai Inn. The guards at the gate sighed again and again, as if they had seen a sheep falling into a tiger's mouth. In the Fulai Inn. When the waiter saw Su Li coming, he immediately came to her with a big smile and asked, "What do you want? Do you want to have a meal or stay in the inn?" Su Li showed a very reluctant smile and gently said, "I'm Su Li." The waiter was so shocked that his eyes widened, and then he bowed to salute Su Li. Few people had seen Su Li's appearance, but her name had already spread throughout the Qinghe town. It could be said that everyone in the Qinghe town knew her. "Lecturer Su, you finally come. I will take you to see Master Su." The waiter led the way for Su Li up the stairs and spat, "Master Su has owed 10 days' rent. Because of your face, our shopkeeper can't drive them away, so he can only delay it. Anyway, they are the 3 main branches. It's not a good thing to delay it all the time. Fortunately, we have been looking forward to the stars and the moon. Finally, you come. Lecturer Su. Lecturer Su." Before the waiter continued to say anything, a round fat man climbed up the stairs flexibly downstairs and said, "I heard that you went to the Qinghe River to relax. You have been gone for more than half a month. I miss you so much." Su Li looked indifferent and slightly nodded. "You must be the boss of the Fulai Inn, Wang Fulai." "Yes, I am." The fat man wiped the sweat on his head and rebuked the waiter. He licked his face and said with a smile, "Fortunately, Lecturer Su remembers my name. Are you here for Master Su and Madam Su?" Su Li gently said, Wang Fulai immediately led the way in front with enthusiasm. The Fulai Inn had a total of 3 floors. The higher the floor, the more upscale and expensive it was. Wang Fulai took Su Li to the best 3 rooms of the inn and stopped. These 3 rooms are all Tianzi rooms with 50 taels of silver a night. Your family has occupied them for 10 days. I can't help it. Anyway, you are a teacher. You should be reasonable and take your family away quickly. Chapter 125. Hearing the noise outside, Wang Fulai was about to say something, but the door of the Tianzi room was opened with a squeak. Su Huanli stared blankly at the 2 people standing outside the door. Then he said happily, "Li, you finally come. Li, you come." Zhu Yan immediately came out of the room. She saw that Su Li was dressed delicately and had a better temperament and appearance than when she was in the Desu town. She couldn't help but have a strong sense of crisis. She must take advantage of this time to completely solve Su Li. If she continued to grow, when she arrived in Yunjing, her origin would be exposed. Thinking of this, Zhu Yan showed an unprecedented gentle smile to Su Li. "Our Li is getting more and more beautiful." Second sister. Su Zipei helped Ma'am Su Chui to come out from the next room. Her eyes were shining brightly, as if she had always admired Su Li. "Second sister, our parents were so happy when they heard that you became the special class lecturer of the Qinghe Girls' School. We all came to see you immediately. Only the second mother stayed at home to look after the Baiwei building. She couldn't leave." Su Zipei said with a smile. She held Su Li's arm intimately. Wang Fulai looked at them and couldn't help but sigh. He didn't expect that Su Li had a good relationship with the Su family. The rumors were exaggerated. Anyway, they were relatives. Looking at the performance of Su Zipei and her daughter, Su Li didn't feel anything, but she was happy and excited. She said, "Dad, Mom, you are taking a lot of trouble. I will go back to see you when I am free. There is no need to be tired. Well, let's not talk about it." Su Huanli didn't let Su Li entangle on this issue for too long. He waved his hand and said, "Your identity is different now. You are a big shot in the Qinghe town. Wherever I go, I can hear your name. Let's go to your residence first and then talk about it in detail." Su Li was embarrassed and said, "I live in the school. You know the rules of the Qinghe girls' school. Outsiders are not allowed to go in." "Even I, how can you talk like that?" "Ma'am." Su Chui pulled a long face and pinched Su Li's hand fiercely. "How can we be outsiders? Your father has already said so. Don't you have any conscience? We're right behind you. Do you think the academy's guards would dare to stop us?" Su Li's face darkened. "The rules of the Qinghe girls' school can't be broken. I am just a lecturer, not the dean. Don't tell me you want your granddaughter to lose her position as a lecturer." "You?" "Ma'am." Su Chui suddenly became speechless. Her wrinkled face turned red. After a long time, she pulled her son's sleeve and pretended to cry. "Son, look. How long has this girl been in Qinghe town? You've even learned to talk back. This is really going against the heavens. What kind of sin has my Su family committed?" Su Huanli's face was also very ugly. He looked at Su Li very coldly. He vowed to his mother that after he came to the Qinghe town, it would be very easy for him to open a branch of the Baiwei building under the care of Su Li. Unexpectedly, there was no place for him to stay. "Second sister. I say, how can you be so vicious? Do you really have the heart to let us all sleep on the streets? Li, how did your mother teach you? Why don't you know filial piety at all? Do you have to make your mother completely sad?" In the twinkling of an eye, the intimate family meeting turned into a meeting to chase after Su Li. Wang Fulai was dumbfounded by the sight. It seemed that rumors could sometimes be believed. Seeing a group of people grabbing Su Li and wanting to teach her a lesson, Wang Fulai couldn't bear it and immediately interrupted. "Dear guests, it's not too late to solve it at home. Shouldn't you pay for the rooms? 3 rooms cost 150 taels a day, which means 1,500 taels for 10 days. Thank you for your patronage." "What? 1,500 taels?" Zhu Yan suddenly screamed, "It's a robbery. Do you think that your inn is the Jade Emperor's bedroom?" Seeing that Zhu Yan didn't want to pay, Wang Fulai sneered and said, "You live in the most luxurious Tianzi room. There are only a few of them in the entire Qinghe town. If you dare to refuse to pay, just leave. Otherwise, I will invite you to the government office regardless of lecturer Su's feelings. My granddaughter is the workshop owner of the embroidery workshop. Her status is no less than that of the satrap." "Ma'am." Su Chui stood out with a gloomy face and said, "I'd like to see how you, an innkeeper, send the family of the workshop owner of the embroidery workshop to prison." Wang Fulai was so angry that he took a deep breath and almost choked. He had opened the inn for so many years, but it was the first time that he saw such a shameless family. "Enough." Hearing that, "Ma'am." Su Chui said, "Workshop owner of the embroidery workshop." Su Li's eyes slightly sank and she finally shouted. The whole corridor was suddenly quiet. "Ma'am." Su Chui, who was still quarreling with Wang Fulai, turned around in surprise. It was the first time that she saw Su Li get angry. Even when they almost drowned Su Li in the pig cage last year, she was not so angry. Did Su Li really change after staying in the Qinghe town for half a year? Su Li took a deep breath and took out the only broken silver from her arms. Almost all the money of the Linli building was invested in the fight between the Yen family and the Jin family. She really had no money now. Of course, even if she had money, she would not take it out. Shopkeeper, I am sorry. I only have more than 500 taels of silver. I haven't received the salary of the embroidery workshop yet. After I receive the salary, I will ask someone to send you the remaining 1,000 taels of silver. Is that okay? Facing Su Li's sincere and apologetic eyes, Wang Fulai was stunned and said nothing. His eyes gradually became complicated. It is obviously not your fault, Lecturer Su. Why should you bear the sins of your family? After a long time, Wang Fulai took the broken silver in Su Li's hand and said helplessly, although I don't want it, I also support a group of people in the inn. I will take the silver. As for your family. Alas, it is really not easy for Lecturer Su to stay unstained in the mud. Wang Fulai took the silver and walked away with a speechless expression. On both sides of the corridor, many people stretched out their heads and secretly observed the development of the situation. Those who could live here were naturally from rich families. Naturally, many people were interested in the gossip of the youngest special class lecturer in the Qinghe town. With so many people watching, Su Huanli and others couldn't help but feel embarrassed even if they were thick-skinned. They pulled Su Li to leave the inn. Dad, Mom, you all go back. I really can't arrange a residence for you, unless you are willing to live in a cheap inn. Su Li said helplessly in a pleading tone. Ma'am. Su Chui snorted coldly. She stretched out her hand and grabbed Su Li's purse. When she opened it and saw that there were a few pieces of silver left, she believed Su Li's words and threw the purse to the ground. Useless thing. I thought that your identity could bring some benefits to the Su family. What a waste of effort. Grandma, don't be angry. Maybe Su Li is hiding something from us. Let's not rush to leave. Yes, Mom. Let's find a poorer inn to live in. Let's go to the embroidery workshop tomorrow. Su Li picked up the purse and stood up slowly. She watched Su Huanli and others go farther and farther, but she clearly heard they were talking about something in a low voice. Her eyes flashed with a dark light, and then she silently followed him. Wu Yun, who was observing in the dark, saw this scene and couldn't help but smile triumphantly. Humans are really inferior animals with weaknesses. Your Yen family is strict in defense. It is impossible for you to think that I will find another way. That night, Su Li arranged for Su Huanli and others to live in an ordinary inn. It cost only a few hundred copper coins a night. Of course, she paid the silver. With Su Li, such a soft persimmon, even if the Su family had accumulated a lot of wealth through the Baiwei building, they would not hesitate to exploit Su Li. After entering the inn, Zhu Yan and Ma'am Su Chui told everyone that they were Su Li's biological mother and grandmother. The atmosphere was so embarrassing. Finally, everyone felt bored and let Su Li go. After Su Li returned to the Linli building, Fang Yuan and others who had heard the news immediately surrounded her. The old guys of the Su family actually came to the Qinghe town. It's weird. It's definitely weird. Chu Qingning said with certainty, Su Huanli has always been a person who won't release the hawk until he sees the hare. If there were no absolute benefits waiting for him in the Qinghe town, how could he leave the Baiwei building to the second madam and come to the Qinghe town with his whole family to find Su Li? Fang Yuan didn't speak but nodded in agreement. He had the same opinion as Chu Qingning. Yin Xuedong and Fang Mu both joined Su Li after she came to the Qinghe town, so they didn't know Su Li's family affairs. Now they suddenly heard that there was a group of people behind Su Li, which really surprised them. Wasn't Su Li supposed to be born in a hidden family or a disciple with special abilities? How could she be the second miss of an ordinary businessman's family in a small town? Such a contrast was too big, wasn't it? Ignoring the two people's dumbfounded look, Su Li pushed the two words on the table to Fang Yuan and Chu Qingning. Wu Yun. Chu Qingning was confused and said, Is the matter of the Su family related to Wu Yun? There is no connection at all. Shouldn't Wu Yun be worried about the Jin family and the Lin family now? Fang Yuan's pupils shrank and he thought of something. Pay close attention to the whereabouts of Su Huanli and others. If there is any special behavior, inform me immediately. Su Li's eyes flashed inexplicably. Wu Yun could even think of using Su Huanli's family to threaten the Yan family. Unfortunately, if she was really a hard-working and filial daughter, Wu Yun's plan had almost no weaknesses. But those were all illusions that she deliberately maintained. It seems that I haven't given a class to the Qinghe girls' school for a long time. I haven't seen Hongxiu for many days. I will go to the girls' school first. You can handle the rest by yourselves. Su Li left these words and left lightly. Everyone looked at each other and didn't know what to do. Only Chu Qingning suddenly noticed something and asked blankly, just now Su Li seemed to call her father. Su Huanli, right? According to Miss Su Li's temperament, it's not appropriate to call that kind of person father, right? Fang Mu smiled and said. But Fang Yuan looked gloomy and confirmed some speculation in his heart. He was afraid that she didn't take the Su family seriously from the beginning. Everything was just her acting. Even in the Desu town, they were cheated. They thought that Su Li couldn't let go of her family, so she let Su Huanli bully her. Now it was quite ridiculous. How could a person like Su Li have feelings? Chapter 126. The next morning, Su Li came to the embroidery workshop. The chief steward was busy processing orders. When he saw Su Li, he was delighted. Workshop owner, I haven't seen you for a long time. I've heard about it from Dean Wen. Did you have a good time? Thank you for your concern, Grandpa Jia. The scenery of the Qinghe River is good. Su Li replied with a faint smile. Then she brought up the business, I come for the salary of the embroidery workshop. Jian understood and said with a smile, Workshop owner Su, you are the workshop owner who doesn't care about her salary the most I have ever seen. It's already been 4 months, but you haven't mentioned anything about your salary. I thought you had completely forgotten about the salary. Grandpa Jia, you must be joking. In fact, Su Li briefly talked about the matter of the Su family. Although her tone was light, Jian frowned. He didn't expect that the virtuous workshop owner Su had so many difficulties at home. Workshop owner, if you need any help, just tell me. I will try my best to help you. He didn't want to see such a gentle and pleasant Su Li being bullied for no reason. There were rumors about Su Li's situation at home, but he didn't expect it to be true. Thank you, Grandpa Jia. Let's talk about the salary. Su Li thanked him and mentioned the salary again. Jian immediately laughed and said, Workshop owner Su, you should know that every workshop owner has 10% of the profit. Do you know how much profit the embroidery workshop can make every month? Well, Su Li was speechless. She had never cared about the profit of the embroidery workshop, so she really didn't know. Haha, I know you don't know. Jian laughed loudly and said, After all, our embroidery workshop is appointed by the government. The monthly profit is more than 1 million taels. Workshop owner, you take 10%, which is 100,000 taels. It is 400,000 taels in 4 months. Su Li couldn't help but be surprised. No wonder she didn't see Feng Qingru embroider several times in the previous life. She didn't worry about the expenditure at all. It turned out that the profit of the workshop owner was so terrible. 60% of the remaining 90% will be handed over to the government and the imperial court. The remaining 30% will be left to the embroidery workshop to develop freely. So, you don't need to worry about the embroidery workshop's operation. In fact, since the workshop owner's reputation spread, the business of our embroidery workshop is much more prosperous than before. Many businessmen come for you. Jian kept praising Su Li. When he was about to continue, he saw Gao Dehai running from outside in a panic and said, Miss Head Steward, boss, there's a family outside claiming to be the boss's family. They're clamoring to enter the back hall. Jia's face changed. Speak of the devil. He turned his head and glanced at Su Li, who was worried and scared. He couldn't help but have a strong desire to protect her. He said to Gao Dahai in a deep voice, "Invite them to the central hall." "Boss, why don't you hide at the back and rest first? Let's see how I deal with them." Su Li nodded slightly. Wu Yun must be watching her every move in the dark. Now, the less contact she had with Su Huanli, the less flaws she would expose. To be honest, every time she had to bear the killing intent in her heart and pretend to be well-behaved in front of the Su family, she would be tired of it. Since Jian was around this time, she could take a break. After a short while, Su Huanli and his entourage came to the central hall aggressively. Seeing Jian, who was dressed meticulously in the central hall, Su Huanli immediately restrained his momentum. He nodded slightly and said arrogantly, "Let's go. I am the workshop owner of this embroidery workshop, Su Li's father, Su Huanli. How should I address you?" His words were full of contempt for Jian. Since Jian worked in the embroidery workshop, he must be Su Li's subordinate. Su Li was just his second daughter. It was obvious who was superior. Jian snorted coldly and said calmly, "I am Jian, the manager of the embroidery workshop. I've been working in the embroidery workshop ever since the previous workshop owner took office. Squire Su, you don't have to use workshop owner Su to pressure me. I don't buy it." When Su Huanli and others heard the words, their faces changed. It seemed that they met a tough one. He didn't know if that madam's words still counted. "Steward Jia, you are also a veteran of the embroidery workshop. I have something to say, but I don't know if I should say it." "Ma'am." Su Chui stood out and rolled her turbid eyes. No one knew what she was thinking. "Old madam, please say it." "Ma'am." Su Chui was older than Jian, but Jian still maintained the basic etiquette and softened his attitude a little. "Ma'am." Su Chui secretly breathed a sigh of relief and said, "Su Li is the daughter of the Su family. Although she is successful now, she still can't change the fact that she is a member of the Su family. I heard that she is busy with classes and has no time to come to the embroidery workshop to receive her salary. Let me claim it for her." Jia En's eyes widened. He finally knew how shameless the Su family was. They even said that they took the salary of their granddaughter in such a righteous way. "Old madam, I can't promise you. The embroidery workshop has its own rules. Although you are the grandmother of the workshop owner, you can't overstep your authority and take the salary of the workshop owner." Jian immediately refused. "Ma'am." Su Chui sneered and said, "Well. Huanli, go to the school and ask Li to come here. Isn't her stuff the property of the Su family? Now she is a lecturer in the school. She is so arrogant that she even looks down on her family. She is really a good daughter of the Su family." Hearing "Ma'am." Su Chui's sarcasm, Jian was angry. "Ma'am." Su Chui didn't treat the workshop owner as a person at all. What did she treat the workshop owner as? A money-making tool of the Su family? But he couldn't let Su Huanli leave. Otherwise, the news that Su Li was here would be exposed. "Lord Su, wait." Jian immediately stopped Su Huanli, who was about to leave, and said, "The workshop owner is busy with classes. How can she be disturbed? What you said is reasonable. Let me claim the salary of the workshop owner on behalf of the workshop owner." Hearing Jia En's words, "Ma'am." Su Chui and others were all happy. They didn't expect that Su Li hid money in the embroidery workshop. What the madam said was right. "May I ask, old madam, how much do you want?" Jia En took out an account book and asked with an inquiring look. "Of course, how much do you want?" Su Huanli couldn't help but stand out and said excitedly. He wanted to buy a land to build a branch of the Baiwei building with Su Li's salary. If he didn't take all of it, it wouldn't be enough. All? Jian was so angry that he wanted to throw the writing brush on the ground. He thought that the Su family still had a little conscience and would leave some for Su Li. But he didn't expect that Su Huanli, as Su Li's father, would ask for all of it. Su Li paid for the room in the Fulai Inn yesterday. She only had 1 tael of silver left. How could these bastards not leave any chance for the workshop owner? If so, don't blame me. Jian sneered in his heart, but he nodded his head calmly and said, the workshop owner's monthly salary is 1,000 taels. 4 months will be 4,000 taels. Old madam, do you want banknotes or cash? Ma'am. Su Chui's smile suddenly froze. She couldn't help but blurt out, only 4,000 taels. So little. Jian raised his eyebrows and said, Old madam, how much do you think? The workshop owner is just an idle job. You don't need to do anything at ordinary times. Are you not satisfied with 1,000 taels per month? There is no such good thing in the world. Hearing Jia An's words seemed to be true, ma'am. Su Chui's face darkened. It shouldn't be. The madam clearly said that there were at least hundreds of thousands of taels to be taken. They didn't think it was possible, but they still hoped to get tens of thousands of taels. However, they didn't expect that there were only 4,000 taels, which was much lower than their expectation. For a moment, everyone in the Su family looked pale. Jian laughed in his heart, but he said impatiently, Old madam? Do you still want the 4,000 taels? If not, I will leave. There are many things to do in the embroidery workshop. I have no time to delay. Yes, yes, yes. Ma'am. Su Chui responded and nodded repeatedly. It would be a waste not to take the silver. How could she not take it? The bank notes of Wantong Money House, old madam. I have something else to do, so I can't accompany you. After putting away the account book, Jian shook his head and left. Su Huanli wanted to ask about other things about Su Li, but he didn't see Jian. Forget it. I didn't expect that the workshop owner of the embroidery workshop didn't have much profit. Area is useless, ma'am. Su Chui held the bank notes and turned her eyes to her son. Son, how much silver did you bring? 50,000 taels. Su Huanli took out a lot of bank notes and said, It is enough for us to buy a good land and open a branch shop. I don't know whether Li is willing to continue, dare she not? Ma'am. Su Chui stared at her son and said, She is a great sinner of our Su family. Even if she opens 10,000 byway buildings, she can't atone for the crime of killing my grandson. Son, when you are soft-hearted, you might as well think of Xiaoyan, who was killed by Arya before he was born. Yes, I know. Zhu Yan, who was pregnant, smiled brightly when she heard ma'am. Su Chui's words. In more than a month, her son would come to this world. At that time, it was almost the time when she personally buried Su Li. Madame Wu Yun was really her benefactor. After the Su family left, Jian, who had been observing in the dark, came out from the yard next to Su Li and said with a smile, Workshop owner, they all left. Come out. Su Li came out from the back room with red eyes. She bowed to Jian and said, Thank you, Grandpa Jia. Hey. You can't do that. Jian stopped Su Li quickly and said, I just couldn't stand it and did what I should do. How can you give the 400,000 taels of silver to such unscrupulous parents? It's better to let me save it for you. After you leave the Su family, you can open a shop in the Qinghe town. Su Li nodded gently and smiled through tears. She said, when the eldest brother comes back, everything will be fine. Jia nodded with a smile. But he was curious who the eldest brother was. It was a miracle that Su Li came from such a bad family. Was there another outstanding genius? Su Li didn't withdraw a penny. Since she was going to act, she had to do it. She didn't do anything in the afternoon. She just went to the Fulai Inn and told Wang Fulai that the money of the embroidery workshop was taken away by her family. She couldn't take out 1,000 taels for the time being. Wang Fulai had to wait for her next salary. Wang Fulai was furious, but in the end, he just let out a long sigh. Lecturer Su, if you have a chance to leave the family in the future, you'd better leave and develop yourself. When you ascend to a higher position in the future, I'm afraid that the Su family will cause you a lot of trouble. Thank you for reminding me. Su Li nodded and left. Wang Fulai looked at her back and shook his head. He was afraid that the girl didn't listen to him. Another day passed. In the night wind, Fang Yuan came to the attic of the Linli building. He couldn't help but sigh when he saw the graceful figure sitting on the windowsill and drinking. Are you going to be entangled with the Su family? Su Li turned her head and smiled with a trace of obsession. She said, entangled? No. I'm not entangled. I haven't played enough. They owe me and haven't paid me off. How can I let them go so easily? They owe me too much, too much. She was almost talking in her sleep in the end. Fang Yuan hesitated for a moment. When he approached, he saw that the girl sitting by the window was drunk. He picked her up and put her on the soft bed. Then he murmured in the wind. Chapter 127. Su Huanli took the 4,000 taels of silver from Su Li and the 50,000 taels he brought with him. Finally, he bought a good piece of land on the street of the Linli building, which was diagonally opposite the Linli building. It was worth mentioning that the street with few people gradually had the potential to become a first-class street in the city because of the driving effect of the Linli building. Therefore, the rent had increased. If it was 4 months ago, the price of the shop that Su Huanli bought now was only 20,000 taels of silver. Fortunately, this shop used to be a restaurant. Although it is a little old, it can still be used. When there is income here, I will renovate it. Su Huanli looked at the newly bought empty land and couldn't help but feel distressed. If he had known that the price would rise, he would have bought it earlier. It was Su Li's fault that she didn't tell him. Walking to the second floor, Su Huanli turned over the wooden window with disgust. Then he saw the long line outside the Linli building diagonally opposite. He immediately had mixed feelings. It was said that the Linli building had become the most profitable winery in the Qinghe town. 4 months ago, the Linli building belonged to the Su family and there was nothing there. In just less than half a year, tut-tut. He deserves to be the master of a big family. I can't compare with him, Su Huanli sighed. At his level, he naturally couldn't get in touch with the boss of the Linli building. Although he had heard of Ms. Li, people would first think of a man instead of a woman when it was mentioned. It was impossible to think of Su Li. Even for Yan Shixuan, when he heard the name Mr. Li for the first time, and then he heard the mysterious cultivation, he first thought of Child Li, the hierarch of the Yinma cult in Jianghu. After seeing that Ms. Li was a woman, Yan Shixuan overturned his previous speculation. Although no one in Jianghu knew the true face of Child Li, they all knew that the hierarch was a man, and it was difficult to distinguish good and evil. He was not as kind and easy to get along with as Ms. Li. Zipei, your mother's delivery day is coming. Don't be busy with the new shop recently. Spend more time with your mother. Your father and I will take care of it. There will be no problem. Looking at Su Zipei, who was busy, ma'am. Su Chui quickly stopped her and said with love in her eyes, I will ask Arya to clean up later. I heard that the school also assigned 2 manservants to her. It won't violate the rules if I ask the 2 manservants to help, right? Grandma is right. Second sister didn't even come back for the new year. It's obvious that she doesn't take us seriously. We should teach her a lesson. Su Zipei said, which made ma'am. Su Chui feel so comfortable that the wrinkles on her face were stretched with a smile. When Su Huanli's family was busy with the new store, they didn't know that their every move was noticed by many people. Not to mention the Linli building and Wu Yun, even the Yan family also paid attention to it. Su Huanli's family came suddenly and targeted Su Li in every way. I'm afraid that someone is making things difficult for her. Yan Shixuan was not weak. He could naturally perceive what Su Li could think of. When he received the latest news from his subordinates, he could not help but frown slightly. He sighed slightly and sat down to pinch the space between his eyebrows. His upright face was filled with exhaustion. It was really tiring to plot against the Jean family and the Lin family in the past half-month. Dad, I found it out. The old butler of the Su family who didn't come with us in the Desu town said that someone did go to the Su family to tip off the lecturer Su Li. Yan Zai came in a hurry, and his words immediately refreshed Yan Shishuan. Sure enough. It's strange. The old butler of the Su family can speak for Su Li. It seems that the Su family doesn't just want to bully the little girl. However, even so, the little girl of the Su family is still in a bad situation. Yan Zai muttered to himself. He remembered that Ning Yunji told him that Su Li was supported by Qi Xianqing. Based on this, he must not let Su Li have an accident in the Qinghe town. Otherwise, if that person got angry, not only the Yan family, but also the entire Dehan country would be shaken. Zai, you are responsible for Su Li's safety. Try not to let her get involved in this dispute. If the Su family has any signs, you must eliminate them as soon as possible. Do you understand? Yan Zai heard his father's serious tone, but he looked serious and nodded heavily. Thinking of the appearance of Su Li, who was seriously injured and stained with blood, he couldn't bear to see such a pure, flawless, weak and strong girl being plotted against by the Jean family and the Lin family. In the courtyard of the Qinghe girls' school, Su Li took the latest information from Fang Yuan and smiled slightly. It was really a coincidence that Su Huanli bought the branch of the Baiwei building diagonally opposite to the Linli building. There is no movement from Wu Yun, but the Yan family went to the Desu town and seemed to find something. Fang Yuan added some key points. Su Li nodded and pondered for a moment. Then she said, "Stay still for the time being and wait and see." For several days, Su Li gave this order. Fang Yuan was used to it. He nodded and left instantly. The room was quiet again. Su Li took the AO sword skills and turned to the third hurdle. Then she carefully felt it. She didn't go back to the Linli building these days. If she went back, she would definitely not be discovered by Wu Yun's people. But, nothing was absolute. Su Li never felt that she was very lucky. Now it was a critical period, so she had to be careful. Su Li looked for a while and suddenly thought of something. She raised her head and said, "Mammy, is my mother going to give birth soon?" Mammy Li, who was dozing off in the sun outside the door, was suddenly awakened. She scratched her confused eyes and nodded immediately. She said, "Miss is right. The fifth master will be born in less than a month." The fifth master? Su Li tilted her head and smiled. Mammy Li was puzzled. She said, "Didn't the witch say that the first madam was pregnant with a young master?" "Mammy, ask someone to inquire about it secretly. See which midwife in the city will deliver my mother. Then I can know whether my mother will give birth to the fifth brother or the fifth sister." "Ah. I'm going." Mammy Li stood up and sighed. The miss said that she didn't care, but she still cared about the first madam. Alas, the first madam was an inhuman woman. How many virtues did she accumulate in the previous life to give birth to such an excellent and kind miss? Perhaps both sides couldn't afford to make trouble, so the Qinghe town temporarily returned to peace. Only the newly opened Baiwei building opposite the Linli building became a hot topic recently. I heard that the restaurant opposite the Linli building is very good. Have you all been there? I have been there. I thought it was all bragging. But it turns out that some dishes are really delicious. You don't understand. I heard about it through my connections. Those recipes were developed by Miss Su Li, the most talented woman in the Qinghe town. It would be strange if they are not delicious. I see. Is it the 16-year-old lecturer Su? Hearing what you said, I want to see whether lecturer Su lives up to her reputation. Ho ho, you don't need to doubt the talent of the Mississippi. She is the youngest special class lecturer in the Chingha girls' school. Even the first master of the Lin family doesn't deserve her. I heard that lecturer Su Li is very beautiful. She is really talented and good-looking. The remarks gradually spread, and the business of the Baiwei building was booming. Su Huanli was overjoyed. He felt that it was right for him to pluck up the courage to come to the Qinghe town. The boiler of the restaurant was naturally designed by Su Li, and then he called some helpers from the Desu town. Then, the restaurant completely entered the normal operation. Although the profit was not much because of the old house, Su Huanli was full of confidence in the future. When he made enough money to renovate the restaurant, it would be the time for the new Baiwei building to turn over. With the fame of Su Li, maybe the profit of the new Baiwei building could catch up with that of the Linli building diagonally opposite. In order to celebrate the profit of the new restaurant, Su Huanli was generous. He sent invitations to all the big families in the Qinghe town in the name of Su Li and held a small banquet in the new Baiwei building. The people who came were the brother and sister of the Yan family, Yan Zai and Yan Hongxiu, and the first master and miss of the Jin family and the Lin family, Lin Yanqing and Jin Rulan. The two sides had been fighting openly and secretly for more than a month, and they had never met each other. At this moment, they suddenly saw each other. Of course, they were sharp with each other and didn't give in to each other. Although Su Huanli saw a little clue, he just arrived in the Qinghe town. How could he understand the relationship between the two sides? He immediately greeted them and smiled flatteringly. Aren't you the son and daughter of the satrap? I'm Su Huanli. Greetings to you. Invite them in quickly. Chapter 128. Jin Rulan's voice was not low. Almost all the onlookers around heard it. The smile on Su Huanli's face froze instantly, and his face turned red. He just came to flatter as usual. How could he get into trouble? He had no hatred with the Jin family and the Lin family. Thinking of the power of the Jin family and the Lin family, Su Huanli was full of anger, but he still turned his head with a forced smile and flattered. It turns out that you are the first child Lin and Miss Jin. You are really a perfect couple. Others envy you so much. Jin Rulan was happy and her eyes brightened. She knew that she didn't deserve such an excellent man as Lin Yanqing. Without the help of her family, she couldn't marry Lin Yanqing in this life. Now she was praised by Su Huanli, so she felt comfortable. But Su Huanli turned around and flattered Lin Yanqing and his wife like a fence-sitter, but he didn't see the disgust in the eyes of the siblings of the Yan family. As expected, Su Li's family was as unbearable as the rumor said. Lin Yanqing felt disgusted as if he had eaten a fly when Su Huanli said that he and Jin Rulan were a match. He couldn't help but snort. It turns out that boss Su is a coward. It's lecturer Su's misfortune to have such a father like you. Then Lin Yanqing shook off Jin Rulan's hand that held his sleeve. He turned around and looked at Su Li for a moment. Then he entered the building alone. Su Huanli was dumbfounded. It was the first time for him to flatter others and be scolded. What kind of world was this? He, brother, let's go in too. Yan Hongxiu pulled Yan Zai and ignored Jin Rulan, who was also dumbfounded and lost. She winked at Su Li naughtily and then entered the building together. Su Li inadvertently glanced at the long bow wrapped in cloth on Yan Hongxiu's back. Then she turned her eyes away. The girl's method of blood refining was about to be completed. 49 days. Time passed so fast. After a while, several misses and childs came. The small banquet of the Baiwei building became the gathering place of the young talents in the Qinghe town with the help of various people. Although Su Huanli felt strange, he was not qualified to be picky because of his identity. He immediately ordered people to prepare hot dishes for the banquet. Lin Yanqing was sitting in the room, drinking by himself. His face was cold. Since he married the daughter of the Jin family, no one came to talk to him for a while. From time to time, he would turn his head and look at Su Li, who was still greeting guests at the door, with hidden possessiveness in his eyes. He never had the habit of giving up the woman he liked. From the beginning to the end, Jean Rulin was just an object for the family's interests. He had no interest in such a superficial woman. In the entire Qinghe town, only Su Li could make him have a great desire. Young Master Lin is a newlywed, yet he chose to drink alone here. How puzzling. At this moment, a mocking voice sounded in his ears. Lin Yanqing withdrew his gaze and looked at Yan Zai, who was sitting next to him. He said coldly, "Yan Zai, if you can climb to the top 10 of the College of Martial Arts, I will still pay attention to you. Now, do you think you have the right to speak to me on equal footing?" Yan Zai did grow up. If he heard this kind of words in the past, he would be so angry that his face would turn red. But now, his reaction was very calm. He said, "Whether I have the right or not, it is not up to you, Lin Yanqing. Although Su Huanli of the Baiwei building has poor taste, the wine is the Liehua of the Linli building. Young Master Lin, you have a big appetite. Aren't you afraid of being drunk here?" Lin Yanqing's expression changed slightly. He looked at Yan Zai more seriously and said, "I didn't expect that the son of Satrap Yan is not as bad as I thought. You flatter me, you flatter me. Rumors can never be trusted." Yan Zai smiled slightly and reached out with hands folded, "Just like I didn't expect that young Master Lin would compromise for a small profit and marry a woman like Jean Rulin. I am really puzzled." Blue veins appeared on Lin Yanqing's forehead. Yan Zai's words suddenly poked his sore spot. He couldn't help but refute, "Joke? I wouldn't be such a short-sighted person, if it weren't for." Lin Yanqing suddenly realized that Yan Zai was trying to get information out of him. He was almost tricked. Lin Yanqing's back was covered with a layer of cold sweat, and he immediately shut up. However, Yan Zai laughed lightly. His smile was abnormally deep. "If it's not something, can Big Brother Lin dispel this little brother's doubts?" Lin Yanqing squeezed the wine cup in his hand. He had calmed down at this moment. Naturally, he wouldn't fall into Yan Zai's trap. "Yan Zai, I admit that you don't have the talent in martial arts. But your ability to deceive people is getting better under the guidance of your father. Even I was almost tricked. Unfortunately, I was still not good enough." Then, Lin Yanqing was no longer gentle and elegant. A touch of coldness flashed across his face. "When the Qinghe town completely falls into my hands, let me tell you what it is. What do you think, child Yan?" Yan Zai's eyes also flashed a sense of danger. He said, "It seems that child Lin is very confident. Then I will wait and see." At the small banquet, Lin Yanqing left in advance with the excuse that he was not feeling well. Yan Hongxiu wanted to chat with Su Li, but Yan Zai was in a hurry to leave. So, she had to leave with her brother. The banquet came to an end before it reached the climax, which was really anticlimactic. However, Su Huanli was still very happy and looked forward to the arrival of tomorrow. Su Li returned to the school after dealing with the kitchen affairs. Although the banquet was noisy, she still heard every word of the conversation between Lin Yanqing and Yan Zai. Although she didn't know what the Jean family and the Lin family would do later, she finally decided the fact that there were others standing behind them. "I haven't seen him for 3 days, and I should look at him with new eyes. Yan Zai's temperament has improved recently. In this way, it will not be difficult for me to fulfill the second agreement with him." Under the moonlight, the woods on the mountain behind the courtyard rustled in the night wind. It was true that aptitude was everything in the martial arts circle, but there was always a way out. There was also a kind of peerless xiangong that was only suitable for people with ordinary aptitude to practice. Su Huanli was busy with the restaurant affairs, and Su Li was also called to help. She had no time to spare. At the same time, in the inn where Zhu Yan lived, Ma'am Su Chui walked back and forth in front of the door with a crutch. Su Zipei also stared at the door of the room anxiously. She only heard screams coming from the door, but she couldn't hear the cry of the baby. How long has it been? Why hasn't the baby been born yet? Ma'am. Suchui was so anxious that her forehead was sweating. She obviously hired the best midwife in the city, and Zhu Yan was pregnant for the third time. How could there be an accident? But after a whole day, Zhu Yan's voice was hoarse, and she didn't give birth to her grandson. Grandma, don't worry. I will go in and have a look. Su Zipei was anxious to open the door, but at this time, a loud and powerful cry of the baby finally came. Ma'am. Suchui and Su Zipei looked at each other and were overjoyed. Then they both opened the door and went in. The tired midwife held the baby. When she saw Ma'am Suchui, she immediately greeted them, but she didn't look good. Ma'am. Suchui suddenly felt nervous. She wrapped the baby in the midwife's arms. When she opened the baby, her face immediately became gloomy. A girl. A girl again. Including Su Li, Zhu Yan gave birth to the third daughter. Didn't the witch say that it was a boy? What on earth went wrong? Su Zipei's face was also pale. Of course, she knew that the witch's words were false. Those were all lies bought by her mother with money. But now the baby was born. How could she cover up the lie? It must be the witch who lied. No, I have to ask her. Ma'am. Suchui threw the baby to Su Zipei. Then she didn't look at Zhu Yan, who was lying on the bed and couldn't open her eyes. She went back to the Desu town to find the witch alone. The midwife stood aside and didn't know whether to go or not. Finally, someone came to call her. She took the silver and left dejectedly. If she gave birth to a daughter for a big family, as a midwife, she would also suffer. She didn't even get a red packet. Zipei, where is your brother? Bring it to me. At this time, Zhu Yan finally woke up. Seeing Su Zipei holding the baby in a daze, she immediately said. Su Zipei walked over slowly. She felt sad and threw the swaddle to Zhu Yan. She cried, Mother, it is the fifth sister, not the fifth brother. Mother, didn't you say that it must be the fifth brother this time? Why is it a loser again? What? Zhu Yan's pupils shrank. Regardless of the severe pain in her lower body, she climbed up and untied the swaddle with trembling hands. When she saw the fifth daughter's lower body was bare, she instantly lost all her strength and collapsed on the bed. How could it be? She had obviously eaten so many folk prescriptions, but she still couldn't compare with Li Yuelian, the bitch. By the way, Mother, Grandma has gone back to find the witch. What if the witch betrays us? Su Zipei suddenly panicked. Zhu Yan slowly opened her eyes. Her slightly swollen eyes were terrifyingly calm. She said, Don't worry. The witch won't reveal the secret. Since God doesn't give me a way to live, why should I ask for more? Mother. What are you talking about? Su Zipei felt that something was wrong. She grasped Zhu Yan's hands tightly and said, Mother, you still have me. Don't think about doing stupid things. Zhu Yan smiled, which made Su Zipei's back numb. She was horrified. Even the fifth sister, who had not yet been named in the swaddle, was scared and cried loudly. How could I do stupid things? I just felt that I was too soft-hearted before. Your grandma and father loved me so much, so I didn't do it. As soon as the fifth daughter was born, Ma'am Suchui immediately ran back to the Desu town. Su Huanli didn't even come to see her. In this case, Wu Yun's proposal. Why should she hesitate? Zipei, I have a very important thing for you to do. You must do it secretly. Even your father can't know it. Do you know? Zhu Yan suddenly said in a calm and cautious tone. Chapter 129. When Ma'am Su Chui returned to the Desu town. She immediately ordered the Su family to find the whereabouts of the witch. But the news surprised Ma'am. What? The witch is dead. Li Yin stood in front of Ma'am. Ma'am. Su Chui bowed and nodded slowly, yes. It is said that she died suddenly. Many people said that the witch said something she shouldn't say and was punished by the gods. Punished by the gods, ma'am. Su Chui murmured, and then she looked crazy. It's good to be punished by the gods. My Su family's fine grandson is gone because of her words. My poor fifth grandson, boo-hoo. Ma'am. Su Chui covered her face and cried bitterly. Li Yin didn't know what to do, but he also understood that the third child of the first madam was not so good. Mammy Li, who got the news from the midwife, was the last one to know the result. When she heard that the fifth child of the Su family was a daughter, she couldn't help but feel happy. She thought that the first madam deserved it. Then she told the news to Su Li, who just returned to the courtyard. Fifth sister, I know. Wet nurse, quickly go and cook. I've been busy the whole day and I'm about to die, Su Li responded calmly. Mammy Li sighed that the miss had a higher realm. Then she went back to the kitchen. Su Li took a bath and changed clothes as usual. She washed away the smell of smoke in the Baiwei building. Then she sat quietly to adjust her breath and consolidate her cultivation. She was not surprised that Zhu Yan gave birth to a daughter again. In the previous life, Zhu Yan also gave birth to the fourth and fifth children. They were all daughters. Every time when the news of Zhu Yan's pregnancy came out, ma'am. Su Chui would go down the mountain from the temple and accompany Zhu Yan for a year. Then she returned disappointed. When Zhu Yan gave birth to the sixth child, ma'am. Su Chui didn't bother to go down the mountain. She had seen that Zhu Yan didn't have a son at all. However, Zhu Yan's sixth child was indeed a son. Unfortunately, he was poisoned by Li Yuelian, who was eager to avenge Su Qinghao. He didn't even have the chance to open his eyes and see the world. He was reincarnated to meet the king of hell. At that time, if ma'am. Su Chui was around, Li Yuelian would not have succeeded easily. After ma'am. Su Chui got the news, she was so angry that she vomited blood and died directly. Su Li remembered all kinds of memories of the previous life very clearly. She knew that ma'am. Su Chui actually didn't like Zhu Yan. Li Yuelian was Li Yuelian's second wife. What she wanted was that Zhu Yan could give birth to a legitimate first grandchild. But it was ridiculous that ma'am. Su Chui didn't like Zhu Yan until she died. The next morning, Su Li came to the Baiwei building. Su Zipei, who had lost a lot of weight, suddenly came to her with an infant in her arms. Third sister, what are you doing? Su Li looked confused, but she had a guess in her heart. Su Zipei snorted and impatiently put the swaddle into Su Li's hands. This is fifth sister. You take care of her. Me? Su Li said in surprise, shouldn't I take care of you? How can I take care of them? There are. What else? You are so annoying. This is mother's order. You don't have to come here in the future. They don't make precious beggar's chicken here. I can handle it. Su Zipei put her hands on her hips and snorted, mother said. If there is no milk, look for a wet nurse or rice soup. You are also like this. I am tired now, and I have no time to feed this useless thing. Su Li looked down at the infant in the swaddle who was just born a few days ago and full of curiosity about the world. There was a trace of undetectable tenderness in her eyes. In the previous life, although fifth sister was not favored by her family, she was Zhu Yan's biological daughter. She lived a comfortable life and often stole food from the kitchen for Su Li to eat. I see. Su Li nodded. At this time, Su Huanli saw the two sisters and the infant in Su Li's arms. A trace of impatience flashed in his eyes and he scolded, why are you standing here? Isn't the restaurant busy enough? Go out and help. Su Zipei shrank her neck and heard a cry. It turned out that fifth sister was scared by Su Huanli and began to cry. Again. Crying all day long. So annoying. In the past 2 days, she took care of her mother and fifth sister. Her mother was easy to deal with, but fifth sister often cried. It was useless to persuade her. If she was not afraid of going to jail, she would strangle fifth sister directly. Su Huanli was also upset for a while. He quickly waved his hand to Su Li. You go back first today and let the mammy take care of the baby. The business of the restaurant will be bad if she is kept here. Su Li pursed her lips and said, Father, you haven't named fifth sister yet. Name? Su Huanli seemed to have just got up, and then he waved his hand and impatiently dismissed, Li, you name her. I don't have the time. Then the infant in the swaddle cried louder. Su Huanli immediately pushed Su Li out of the back door and said, Get out of here. Annoying. Su Li's eyes were cold. Her eyes were like a blade cutting through the air. Su Huanli instantly felt cold all over his body, as if he was stared at by a prehistoric beast. But this feeling only lasted for a moment and disappeared. Seeing Su Li go away with the baby, Su Huanli touched his head and said to himself, I'm too tired these days. It seems that I have to have a good rest. In the courtyard of the school, Mammy Li was shocked when she saw Su Li came back in the daytime with a baby in her arms. It's fifth sister. Su Li carefully placed the baby on the bed and then whispered, Mammy, find a wet nurse for fifth sister. This little guy has been drinking rice soup all the time. I'm afraid that he is hungry. Ah. I'm going now. Mammy Li felt sad. Miss was in the same situation in those days. If she didn't have a baby who died early, Su Li would have been drinking rice soup all the time. Su Li leaned over the bed and looked at the quiet sleeping face of the little girl on the bed. No one knew what she dreamed of, but she smiled innocently. In the previous life, your name was Su Lainan. In this life, you don't need to choose such a meaningless name. You should have your free life. You are Su Yusheng. Su Li chuckled and scratched Su Yosheng's smooth face. Although the fifth sister was born by Zhu Yan and was the flesh and blood of the Su family, Su Li didn't hate it. Instead, she felt that it was a chance for her to make up for her regret. In the previous life, she watched the fifth sister fall into the abyss of endless desire under the indoctrination of Zhu Yan and Su Zipei. In this life, she could at least change this and make the fifth sister's childhood more bright. There were few things that couldn't be bought with money in the Qinghe town. Soon Mammy Li came back with a wet nurse. When the wet nurse saw Su Li, she was shocked at first. Later, she knew that the baby was Su Li's younger sister, not an illegitimate daughter. Then she also saw that Su Li was still a virgin. She was relieved immediately. She was the first talented girl in the Qinghe town. It was a big scandal that she secretly gave birth in the school. After arranging the affairs of the fifth sister, it was dark. Su Li went upstairs after dinner. Suddenly, a black shadow flashed by the window. There was one more person in the room. It was Fang Yuan. Su Li frowned and said, It's just after 5:00 now. You came 3 hours earlier. What happened? Fang Yuan looked dignified and said quickly, Just now, a group of men in black attacked the satrap's mansion. Most of the official silver was stolen. A large number of embroidery materials that were supposed to be handed over to the imperial court were also burned. The Yan mansion is in a mess. Su Li's pupils contracted violently and she said, Finally, you can't help it? No, it's not Wu Yun. Fang Yuan looked more serious and said, Wu Yun didn't move at all, so we didn't notice it. We couldn't help satrap Yan. Su Li took a deep breath and sat down. She said slowly, Yan Shixuan's cultivation is at the peak of the acquired realm. If he tried his best to stop them, he could kill 1 or 2 of them. How could he let them succeed? I don't know. Satrap Yen is also anxious. Now he is thoroughly investigating the Qinghe town. The official silver can't be transported out of the town quietly. We also suspect that the thieves have a foothold in the town. While talking, Su Li had changed into the Mr. Li costume that she hadn't used for a long time. She said, "It's urgent. I will go with you. If the Yen family is defeated, the Linli building will be in trouble." She bet on the Yen family. If the Yen family was blamed by the imperial court for incompetence, it was very likely to lose its position. At that time, no matter which family of the Jin family or the Lin family became the satrap, they would have a way to deal with the Linli building. The inborn senior was powerful, but in front of the giant Dahan country, it was too small. Speaking of it, it's because Yen Shixuan is too weak. While running, Su Li's eyes flashed. It could be said that the Qinghe province was the weakest among the 20 provinces of the Dahan country. In the other 19 provinces, the satrap himself had the inborn cultivation. One of them dominated the main city, and others didn't dare to act rashly. Or, there was a senior of the inborn realm in the family. Even if the family couldn't dominate, it could suppress other families. No one was like Yen Shixuan. He didn't reach the inborn realm, and there were few people in the mansion. There was not even a person in the acquired 9th hurdle. Yen Shixuan only had the military power in his hand. But he couldn't use the military to deal with the Jin family who also had an official position. Otherwise, Jin Jintian would immediately charge him with the crime of using the military power without authorization, which was a serious crime of the imperial court. When Su Li came to the satrap's mansion, she saw Yen Shixuan was angry. "Search. Search with all your strength. Even if you have to dig 3 feet into the ground, you must find those thieves." Except for the necessary personnel to look after the rest of the official silver, all the people in the satrap's mansion were sent by Yen Shixuan to search for the whereabouts of the thieves, including Yen Hongxiu and Yen Zai. Yen Zai was about to go out with a group of people, but he ran into Su Li. He immediately said happily, "Father, Mr. Li is here." "Mr. Li, I haven't seen you for a long time. How are you recently?" "Of course, the Linli building is good, but there seems to be some trouble in your mansion." Su Li smiled and her words were quite meaningful. Yen Shixuan braced himself to come over and sighed, "Mr. Li, I'm afraid that you will be disappointed this time." "Alas, satrap, you don't need to say more. The Linli building is here to help. If you need any help, please let me know." Yen Shixuan shook his head helplessly and said, "Thank you very much, Mr. Li. But I still don't understand how the thieves sneak into the mansion. Even I didn't notice it. Now it's just a blind cat catching a mouse. It's purely luck." Yen Zai listened to the conversation between the two and was full of doubts. It was obvious that they owed money to Mr. Li. Was there a secret relationship between his father and Mr. Li? Yen Zai suddenly remembered that half a month ago, the family suddenly cheered up the financial situation. He was shocked and looked at Su Li from the original reverence to a layer of gratitude. "Report." Suddenly, a soldier panted forward and said loudly, "Lord, we have found the whereabouts of the official silver. We found 50,000 taels of official silver in the Byway building on the Dongger Street. The official seal is clear. It is the lost thing in the treasury." "The Byway building?" Yen Shixuan's face changed dramatically and he couldn't help being shocked. Then he said sternly, "Block the Byway building immediately. Don't let anyone escape. Arrest the people of the Byway building." Yen Shixuan paused and then said in a low voice, "Arrest them all. Leave no one alive." Fang Yuan stood behind Su Li. He obviously heard that Su Li's breath was slightly stagnant and then returned to normal. "Mr. Li, the official silver has been settled. Sorry, I can't stay here." "Excuse me." Su Li's face was covered with a veil, so people couldn't see the change of her expression. Her tone was still as usual, "It should be so. Since there is a result, the Linley building will not intervene. I'm leaving. Thank you for the help of the Linley building. I'm very grateful. After some polite greetings, Yan Shixuan immediately left with his people. Su Li and Fang Yuan returned to the Linley building. Standing in front of the window on the top floor, they clearly saw that the Baiwei building was crowded with soldiers. People were dragged away one after another. Su Li, if you want to retaliate against the Su family, you don't have to do this. Fang Yuan organized his words and didn't know how to continue. Chapter 130. It's not you. Fang Yuan slightly opened his thin lips and was surprised. It was not that he was inconsiderate, but that Su Li's reaction was too indifferent when she heard the news. She was so indifferent that he suspected that the initiator was Su Li herself. It's better to think about how to save the situation than to doubt me. Su Li looked at Su Huanli struggling to be dragged away by the officers and soldiers. She said coldly, I don't have time to rebuild the Linley building in other counties. Fang Yuan watched Su Li leave. He frowned for a moment and then relaxed. Thinking about it carefully, Su Li couldn't be the murderer who stole the official silver. Otherwise, the good situation that the Linley building painstakingly created would be destroyed. He only saw the hatred between Su Li and the Su family, but ignored Su Li's code of conduct. Whether it was the agreement with the brother and sister of the Yan family or the 1 million taels of silver lent to Yan Shixuan, it was enough to prove that Su Li favored and supported the Yan family. How could she destroy the chessboard and put the Yan family in danger? I was impulsive. Thinking of this, Fang Yuan was annoyed. He not only thought in the wrong direction, but also blamed Su Li impulsively. Now he felt that he was extremely stupid and didn't know what Su Li would think of him. Fang Yuan, why are you still here? The men in black have made new moves. Su Li has gone to the school. Chu Qingning came in and shouted hurriedly. Fang Yuan was like waking up from a dream. He immediately returned to normal and left with Chu Qingning in a hurry. When Su Li rushed back to the school, it was dawn. Soon, she received a message from Wen Ruomin. Wen Ruomin asked her to go to discuss something important. When Su Li went there, she found that Yan Shixuan was also there. Seeing that Su Li came over with a confused face, Wen Ruomin felt distressed. She didn't know what happened last night. Dean, why do you call me here so early? Su Li said with confusion. Then she turned around and seemed to see Yan Shixuan. She quickly saluted and said, I'm Su Li, satrap Yan. Yan Shixuan nodded slightly and looked solemn. There was a trace of apology in his eyes. Su Li, you come at the right time. I have something to tell you. Wen Ruomin's expression was complicated. She held Su Li's hand and hesitated for a long time before telling her what happened last night. Satrap Yan knew that it wasn't your father who did it, but the Jin and Lin families were keeping a close eye on it. He had no choice but to bring your father back to prevent them from having any evidence against him. It could be considered as a covert protection for your father. Su Li's eyes were red. She bit her lips and nodded. Wen Ruomin was both gratified and distressed. Su Li was very sensible. But it was too cruel for her to be involved in the intrigues between adults at the age of 16. Look at this. This was delivered to the academy by the beggar today. I've already sent someone to investigate the origins of this note, but there's probably no result. When Ruomin picked up the note on the table and handed it to Su Li stared at it and a vague light flashed in her eyes. What was written on the note wasn't evil, if one looked at the surface. This was clearly a secret letter to be given to Su Li alone. It stated the time and place for Su Li to meet, how to distribute the official silver profits, and the prospects for a better future. If Su Li didn't stand here, she almost believed that she was with the thieves who stole the official silver. Wen Ruomin and Yan Shixuan were not fools. They figured out the contradiction quickly. If it was really a secret letter, how could it be delivered to the academy by a beggar? After discussing for a moment, they quickly came to a conclusion. The message on the note seemed to be written to Suli, but it was actually written to them. It was a threatening letter to ask them to hand over Suli. Dean, I have nothing to do with the people in the letter. Suli breathed quickly and a trace of panic flashed in her eyes. It seemed that she was afraid that Yan Shushuan and Wen Ruomin didn't believe her. Wen Ruomin sighed and touched Suli's soft hair. She said with a smile, silly girl, of course, we know that you have nothing to do with them. This letter actually asks us to hand you over. What? Suli slightly opened her eyes, as if she didn't understand. Yan Shushuan frowned and stared at the crumpled note in Suli's hand. Suli came from the Desu town. She had a gentle and quiet temperament. Her personal social circle was also very narrow. It was impossible for her to become enemies with these thieves. The only possibility was that she was implicated by them. Lord Yan, I probably already know who is playing tricks behind the scenes. The light of wisdom flashed in Wen Ruomin's eyes. She said, Suli, do you remember who you offended when you visited Dean Gong? Dean Gong. Suli pretended to think, and then suddenly understood. She blurted out, is it Madame Gong? But I just contradicted her a little. Does she have to do this? Madame Gong. Wu Yun. Yan Shushuan's expression changed. Finally, he was completely gloomy. If Wu Yun did have the means and ability to set up such a trap, it was hateful. Why didn't he think that she was behind the scenes? Wen Ruomin couldn't help but smile bitterly when she heard Su Li's naive words. She said, Suli, some people are narrow-minded, which can't be measured by ordinary people. Wu Yun is narrow-minded and will seek revenge for the smallest grievance. Her plan was ruined by a senior. It is inevitable that she will vent her anger on others. Everyone likes to bully the weak. Among her enemies in the Qinghe town, you are the easiest one to bully. I see. Su Li seemed to be suddenly enlightened, and then fell into deeper anxiety. She hurriedly said, what should we do? Workshop owner Su. Yan Shushuan, who had been silent beside her, finally said, for now, we can only ask you to go to this place to test it. I will send someone to follow and protect you in secret. If we see the note and don't respond, it is hard to guarantee that the other party will run away with the official silver. If I lose, I will take my wife and children back to my hometown. But the head of the Su family will be in danger. Under the pressure of the Jin family, I am afraid that I can only hand him over to the imperial court for punishment. Workshop owner Su, what do you think? Su Li seemed to be struggling, and then she gritted her teeth and said, I am willing to go. I believe that everything in the world has its own public opinion. I, Su Li, will take responsibility for what I have done. Madame Gong, just come to me. There is no need to embarrass my father. Yan Shushuan felt ashamed when he heard this. He had underestimated this young owner's courage. Although she was very afraid, she stood up without hesitation for a father who did not treat her as a human, and more importantly for the Yan family. She was young, but she could see everything clearly. Alas, girl, when Ruomin seemed to think of something in the past, and sadness flashed in her eyes. She gritted her teeth and said in a deep voice, girl, don't worry. Even if I lose my face, I will ask a senior to protect you in secret. You will definitely be safe. After the three people discussed the time and details, Yan Shushuan arranged soldiers to escort Su Li back to the courtyard, and then sent seriously ill people to protect her. After Su Li and Yan Shushuan left, when Ruomin sat for a moment, and then her turbid eyes became clearer. She took out another note from under the table. This note was found at her bedside in the morning, and she did not show it to anyone except herself. If Su Li does not come, the Yan family and the Qinghe girls' school will have a hard time. Wen Ruomin, you are still the same as 16 years ago. You can't protect her at all. Haha. Tear. Wen Ruomin tore the note into pieces with a sullen face. Then she glanced at the direction of Su Li's courtyard and said softly, "Guards, I want to go to the Linley building." The courtyard of the school was heavily protected by soldiers, so it naturally could not stop Su Li. It did not take Su Li much time to return to the Linley building. Wu Yun has a helper, and his means are good. Su Li put the note on the table calmly and said, he can steal a large amount of official silver from the government office and burn the embroidery without being noticed. The first possibility is that this person's lightness skill is so high that he can ignore the protection of the warehouse of the government office and enter it. The second possibility is that the person is like you, Su Li, and he has mastered an extremely brilliant poison skill. The elite soldiers of the government office will be in a trance and be ignorant. Chu Qingning shook his head and said, but Fang Yuan retorted, it is unlikely. With Yan Shishuan's sense of smell, he should be aware of the existence of the smoke. Of course, if it is the kind of black smoke refined by Su Li, it is another matter. Is there a third possibility? Fang Mu obediently sat at the table and looked at the crowd. He raised his hand and said, a mole. No way. Yin Shuadong showed doubt and said, that is an important place of the government office. The warehouse is guarded by the elite soldiers of the government office. They pledge their loyalty to the satrap's mansion. If there is a mole in this group of people, will there be any secrets in the satrap's mansion? Looking at the heated discussion, Su Li smiled slightly and said, of course there is a mole. But it is not in the government office, but in the Baiwei building. Speaking of the Baiwei building, everyone's look changed. Fang Yuan reacted first and said in a cold tone, you mean? Su Li kept smiling and said slowly, only Su Huanli was arrested. Even my dear third sister happened to go back to the inn to take care of my mother. It is really a coincidence. Zhu Yan and Su Zipei. Chu Qingning was speechless and looked strange, but why did they do that? Didn't the first madam just give birth? What is the benefit for her to put Su Huanli in prison? Su Li didn't answer, but Yin Shuadong showed a thoughtful expression. It seemed that it was not very strange for Zhu Yan to do such a thing. But at this time, Haydn said outside the door, bosses, Dean Wen of the Qinghe girls' school suddenly came to visit. Wen Ruomin? Su Li raised her eyebrows. She just came back from the school. Could it be, after a while, in the reception hall of the back hall of the Linley building, Su Li dressed as Mr. Li, and Wen Ruomin sat opposite each other. Yin Shuadong poured a cup of tea for Wen Ruomin respectfully and left with a smile. Wen Ruomin was quite flattered. In terms of status, the shopkeeper of the Linley building was almost the same as her, the dean. Yin Shuadong's service was too friendly. She felt strange, but Su Li's voice pulled her back from thinking to reality. I haven't seen you for a long time. Dean Wen, you are still elegant. But why do you suddenly visit me? Wen Ruomin looked ashamed. She stood up and bowed slightly. I heard that Mr. Li has been practicing in silence. I shouldn't disturb you rashly. But, Mr. Li, can you let me tell you a story and then listen to my request? Speaking of this, it is actually related to the little lecturer Su Li in my school. Su Li's eyes flashed, but she said with a smile, in this case, Dean Wen, please tell me. I am all ears. Chapter 131. 18 years ago, a talented girl from a poor family was born in the Qinghe town. Her name was Su Yun. Su Yun's family had been poor farmers for 3 generations, but Su Yun's parents sold everything they had just to let her go to school. They thought that it would be the best result if she could only read a few words and marry a good family. Unexpectedly, Su Yun showed an extraordinary talent in literature. Soon, Wen Ruomin, who had just taken over as the dean of the girls' school, took a fancy to her and accepted her as a student. This kind of student relationship was not the general teacher-student relationship in the school. It was more like the close relationship between master and apprentice in the martial arts circle. Wen Ruomin treated Su Yun as her own daughter and taught her carefully. Su Yun didn't let Wen Ruomin down. At the age of 16, she successfully passed the preliminary examination and entered the Yunjing National College. 1 year later, she almost became a female official of the Dahan country. Su Yun's parents and Wen Ruomin were very happy. 1 year later, Su Yun's reputation as a talented woman spread all over Yunjing. Many young talents in Yunjing chased after her like crazy bees and butterflies. They all wanted to marry Su Yun. Although Wen Ruomin was worried that Su Yun didn't know people well, she believed that Su Yun could choose a good family to marry because of her intelligence. From then on, Su Yun became the madam of a rich and powerful family in Yunjing and one of the few female officials in the imperial court. But 2 years later, when she saw Su Yun escape back to the Qinghe town with blood all over her body and finally die in her arms, she was totally stunned. I don't know what she experienced in Yunjing in those 2 years and why she was chased. But when I remembered that I encouraged her to enter the official career and become a female official, I regretted it. Sometimes I think that if I didn't let her go to Yunjing that year, maybe she wouldn't die at the age of 18. And I didn't even know who her enemy was. Seeing Wen Ruomin burst into tears in front of her, Su Li's face under the veil didn't change at all. Only a flash of light flashed in her eyes from time to time. Su Yun also had the surname Su. It was fate. There were too many people with the surname Su in the world. Besides, the Qinghe province was a big province with the surname Su. 3 out of 10 people had the surname Su. It seemed that Su Yun had a tragic life. But Su Li had experienced so many tragedies in her previous life. Wen Ruomin's words couldn't arouse any emotion in her heart. However, Su Li comforted him on the surface, "This is fate. I think Miss Su Yun won't blame you in heaven. It's been so many years, so I'm sorry for your loss." Wen Ruomin wiped her tears and said embarrassedly, "Mr. Li, I'm sorry. This old lady has said so much, but actually, I want to say." The next words seemed to be a little difficult to say. When Ruomin hesitated for a while and finally said, "Su Li also encountered great danger." Satrap Yen said that Mr. Li's cultivation was profound. Even Satrap Yen felt inferior. "Could you ask Mr. Li to protect the girl secretly?" When Ruomin begged and made a fist and palm salute. She said, "I think that Mr. Li doesn't like my family and background. If Mr. Li agrees to help me, I will be duty-bound to help you if you need any help in the future." A strange feeling rose in Su Li's heart. She couldn't figure out why Wen Ruomin begged so much for her. Even if it was to make up for the regret in her heart many years ago, she couldn't understand it. Because she would never have the emotion to make up for her regret in this lifetime. If she had a grudge, she would take revenge on the spot. "Dean Wen, although I'm very moved by your words," Su Li said with regret, "but something went wrong in my practice method recently. It's not suitable for me to help you. Otherwise, I will definitely help you in person." "Really?" Wen Ruomin looked disappointed. Su Li's tone was sincere, so she didn't doubt the truth. Otherwise, Mr. Li could refuse directly based on his superior identity. Why did he make up an inauspicious excuse? "However, I can send someone to protect Miss Su Li secretly. Although his cultivation is not as good as mine, he is also a good fighter. Even Satrap Yen can't fight with him for more than 10 moves. What do you think?" Su Li said again. When Ruomin's disappointment immediately turned into surprise. She said hurriedly, "That's really great. Mr. Li, you scared me to death when you didn't finish your words. I believe that Mr. Li won't beat around the bush because of your character. The thief and I will meet at the broken temple in the mountain outside the city at midnight tomorrow. I will go back and wait for the good news. Dean Wen, please." After seeing Wen Ruomin off, Su Li returned to the underground adytum. Fang Yuan and others immediately surrounded her. "You want us to protect you?" Chu Qingming felt strange. Was there a more strange request than this in the world? There must be a lot of people around the broken temple tomorrow. Don't take it lightly. Fang Yuan frowned and analyzed. Xuedong and Xiaomu's cultivation is still low, so they stay in the Linli building. Chu Qingning and I will go there. As for who will contact Satrap Yan. Chu Qingning and Fang Yuan looked at each other, and both of them were not sure. They had made good progress in cultivation recently, but they had not reached the peak of the acquired realm. If they met Satrap Yan, they were afraid that they would be easily exposed. Where is Luo Yichen? Su Li raised her eyebrows and said. In the martial arts field in the backyard of the Linli building. Mei Ruhan sat at a small table to do accounts. Luo Yichen's upper body was naked. The hot sweat dripped along the perfect muscle lines to the ground. As he punched the wooden pile, he was calm and happy. It seemed that there would be no problem for him to live like this until the end of time. At this moment, Haiden's head suddenly stretched out from the door and shouted, Boss Luo, the bosses are looking for you. Mei Ruhan was looking at Luo Yichen in a daze. She was suddenly awakened by the voice. She was scared like a frightened deer and quickly lowered her head to pretend to do the accounts. Luo Yichen looked back and couldn't help but smile. When he turned his head again, he had calmed down and a glimmer of light flashed through his eyes. Take me there. It had been more than a month. Did the woman finally give him a task again? Since he recovered, he hadn't done anything. He hoped that this task wouldn't let her down. At least it could prove that he didn't stay in the Linli building for nothing. Every time Luo Yichen saw that Chu Qingning and others were busy while he was idle, he would naturally feel uncomfortable. It seemed that he hadn't been completely trusted by the girl. But he was also like a dull gourd. It was impossible for him to take the initiative to ask for a task like Chu Qingning did. Luo Yichen got dressed and followed Haiden all the way to the door of the adytum. His pupils shrank slightly. He had lived here for 2 months, but he didn't know that there was a adytum in the Linli building. Boss Luo, Boss Li lets you in, which means that she has completely trusted you. Don't let her down. Haiden smiled and opened the door of the adytum. He beckoned Luo Yichen to go in. Luo Yichen snorted and didn't answer. He walked in with his head held high. Although he couldn't tell Chu Qingning and others about his origin, he disdained to bite the hand that fed him. Oh, I'm coming, Luo Laosi. Seeing Luo Yichen coming in, Chu Qingning immediately put his arm around Luo Yichen's shoulder and said, You could have come here a long time ago. Unfortunately, there are no decent tasks recently. Now, here comes a task. What task? Luo Yichen couldn't help but ask. He immediately looked at Su Li sitting in the middle. He couldn't help but slightly open his thin lips and his eyes were full of shock. She didn't wear a veil. She looked younger than me. She was a little beautiful, although not as lovely as Ruhan. For a moment, Luo Yichen had countless thoughts in his mind. But his knowledge in the Qinghe town was limited, so he didn't know that Su Li had other identities. At midnight tomorrow, there will be a confrontation in the ruined temple in the mountain outside the Qinghe town. You should be more familiar with that place than any of us. Luo Yichen nodded. He had lived there for nearly half a year. Of course, he was familiar with that place. Su Li crossed her fingers and leaned on the back of the chair. She smiled slightly and said, Your task is to contact the people of the satrap's mansion and the Qinghe girls' school as the protector of the Linli building tomorrow. Then, together with the soldiers, you will secretly protect the female lecturer of the Qinghe girls' school who is going to negotiate with the thieves. Do you understand? Luo Yichen's pupils shrank slightly and he said, I will contact the people of the satrap's mansion. He was a fugitive. Wasn't it a little too bold to contact the people of the government? Don't worry, fourth brother. Chu Qingning smiled and made a circle with his fingers. He said, An appearance disguise pill will make Ruhan unable to recognize you. Luo Yichen's expression was slightly relaxed. He forgot that Su Li's medical skills were extremely profound. An appearance disguise pill was nothing to her. Su Li took out the green porcelain bottle and threw it to Luo Chen. She was no longer lazy and reminded seriously, "Be careful tomorrow. It is not ruled out that there will be an inborn expert involved in this matter. If you put your life first, I don't want to see the Linli building, which has just made some progress, to suffer losses." Hearing that, everyone was shocked and nodded slightly. Luo Chen pinched the porcelain bottle in his hand and there was an inexplicable emotion in his heart. Usually, except for Chu Qingning who was easy to get along with, Fang Yuan and Fang Mu regarded him as a waste. They didn't regard him as a new force of the Linli building at all. Even the lowest level waiters of the Linli building had some complaints about him, but they didn't say it in front of him. Mei Ruhan heard a lot of complaints, but she preferred to be wronged alone and never mentioned it to him. This time, the Linli building seemed to have a collective action. He could finally show his cultivation and really get the respect of Fang Yuan and the people of the Linli building. Thinking of this, Luo Chen was looking forward to the next day. Fang Yuan and others noticed the excitement in Luo Chen's heart. They were all confused. Did Luo Chen really want to devote himself to the Linli building until his last breath? It was okay for them to take revenge, but why did Luo Chen do it? The next day, the Qinghe town was bustling as usual. Ordinary people lived their own lives and didn't notice that the governor of the Linli building was facing an unprecedented crisis today. "Zai, check the number of troops again," Yan Shixuan ordered. He looked serious and was a little upset. He always felt that things would not be as simple as he thought. If the enemy deliberately exposed their position, they could set up an ambush. But if it was so easy to deal with them, would Wu Yun still be Wu Yun? "Dad, we have checked 5 times. They are all the direct elite soldiers of the mansion. The news is also tightly blocked. There can be no traitors." Yan Zai was dressed in a suit, and Yan Hongxiu, who was also dressed as a martial arts practitioner, followed him. When Yan Shixuan saw Yan Hongxiu, he immediately frowned and said, "Hongxiu, what are you doing here? Go back to accompany your mother." Hongxiu suddenly curled her lips and said, "No. I want to go too. Why can the third brother go but I can't? I can already draw this bow halfway. Its deterrent power is no worse than that of Dad." Hongxiu pointed to the silver bow behind her and said angrily, "You're tuning in to the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.